we've been in contact a lot and stuff, but we'll just see how it's going.
Yeah, that'll be hard. That's what I mean, it's coming up.
Yeah, and there's lots of promises were made, but nothing changed. So we'll see.
We had an unbalanced line, so I moved you over.
Keep us on our toes. You can
Just keep it. Good evening and welcome to the March 28, 2013 meeting of the Edina Planning Commission. My name is Kevin Staunton. I am the chair of the commission and calling the meeting to order. Jackie, would you call the roll, please?
Here.
Commissioner Schroeder.
Here.
Commissioner Potts.
Here.
Commissioner Carpenter.
Here.
Commissioner Forrest. Here. Commissioner Carr. Here. Chair Scott.
Here. Next on the agenda is the approval of the meeting agenda. Are there any additions or modifications to the meeting agenda? Seeing none, I'd take a motion to approve the meeting agenda.
So moved.
And a second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Same sign. And the meeting agenda is approved. Next up is approval of the consent agenda. The only item on the consent agenda this evening is the minutes of the regular meeting of the Edina Planning Commission meeting of March 13th. Are there any modifications to those minutes? Commissioner Carr, I believe you identified a minor one that you'd pass along to Jackie. Okay, very good. Hearing none, I would take a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
And second?
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Same sign. And the consent agenda is approved. Next up is community comment. This is the time of our meeting where we invite residents from the community to comment on items that are not on the agenda this evening. And if there is anyone here who would like to bring something to our attention, we welcome them at this time. Welcome, Mr. Peterson. We're having community comment. Is there an item that you'd like to discuss that's not on the agenda this evening? All right. Hearing none, I would take a motion to close community comment. And a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Next up on the agenda is public hearings, and we have one public hearing this evening. It's a preliminary plat with variances. Frank and Carol Seidel, 4232 Oakdale Avenue and 4412 Morningside Road in Edina. Carrie, you're going to introduce this topic? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Staunton, members of the Commission. This is a property that you're all familiar with over the last few months, located up in Morningside, northeast corner of the city. It is the Seidel property. It's a little over 3 acres in size, located in between Littell Street on the north and Morningside Road along the border of St. Louis Park. The site is heavily wooded. There's some slopes that run through the middle of the site and along the western lot line. You may recall there was right-of-way that was originally intended when this area was platted to serve these lots. However, over time, the city of St. Louis Park has vacated their portion of the right-of-way. And quite some time ago, the city of Edina vacated its portion, and that's partially due to those steep slopes that we saw on the screen previously. This site is located in our R1 zoning district, the single dwelling unit district. Just to show you a couple of pictures to refresh your memory on the site. This picture was taken from Littell Street. It looks at that slope area that runs east-west through the site, located here. Another view of that steep slope. This picture was taken from Morningside Road, looking north into the site. This is the existing Seidel home that would be removed as a result of the subdivision. You see the mature trees on the site. This is roughly the location where the cul-de-sac would come in to serve the site. This has been shifted a little bit to the west from the first time that we looked at it. This is a look along the western lot line where the road was originally scheduled to be located along that western lot line. The applicant, when they looked at developing this site, laid out a subdivision that meets all of our code requirements. And that's the subdivision that's on the screen. So the applicant is entitled to 8 lots, and that would include a connection of Morningside Road up to Littell Street with 8 lots accessing off of that new road. This is the plat that meets all of our code requirements. So rather than developing the site in that manner, the applicant had originally last fall proposed a cul-de-sac off of Morningside Road in this location generally here. When the Planning Commission reviewed that, you had suggested to them that they take a look at some other ways to subdivide the property. Be creative, maybe create some smaller lots more consistent with the neighborhood, maybe narrow up the street. So the applicant did come back and brought those 3 sketches before the Planning Commission and the City Council. This is a look at what was titled the modified original proposal. Similar to the first request, with the right-of-way narrowed as the street enters. The second was again a narrow road coming in that had 3 homes that faced Morningside Road. This did include 2 additional lots, so this was a 10-lot subdivision. And sketch B also was a 10-lot subdivision. Again, there were 3 homes that faced Morningside Road with smaller lots. Those sketches A and B, quite a large number of variances were required with that. As a result of that sketch plan review, the applicant is now back with that modified original plan. So the applicant again I apologize for flipping the cul-de-sac. It's north is pointing up now, Morningside Road on the south, Littell up on the north. So the applicant is proposing a 40-foot wide right-of-way. The original plan called for a 50-foot right-of-way. The right-of-way has also been shifted slightly to the west, creating a little bit more room to the house that's located right here, 4408. This outlot here that was originally proposed has been widened to about 18 feet. The applicant is suggesting that they would deed that to the property at 44.8 rather than have a homeowners association maintain this strip. This strip here would go to lot number 6. A sidewalk is proposed along the west lot line, about a 4 to 5 foot sidewalk that would connect with the existing sidewalk on Morningside Road and then along Lynn. The drainage or ponding area would be located in the low spot on the site, located here. In general, the roofs, the drainage would be channeled to the street, and there would be a catch basin at the end of the cul-de-sac with a pipe that would empty out into this rain garden or this ponding area here. The Minnehaha Creek Watershed District is our regulatory agency for those plans, so anything that's approved here would be subject to Watershed District approval. The applicant is suggesting a conservation easement along the tree area. The dashed lines, that indicates the conservation area. So these would be put into permanent protection, the trees, this location here, and those slopes, kind of as a no disturb area. There would be 82 mature trees that would be protected within that red area, 50 within the permanent conservation easement. So there's a savings of about 40 trees using this cul-de-sac plan versus the through street that would connect up with Littell. A park dedication requirement is required in this case for 2 lots. There are 6 existing lots out there. With this plat, there would be 8 lots. So the park dedication requirement of 2 additional lots at $5,000 per unit would be required. You may recall that a traffic study was done by WSB and determined that the proposed location of the cul-de-sac, while not ideal, is the safest location. It provides that separation with the intersection further to the west here, and they did conclude that the addition of 6 homes wouldn't have a significant or negative impact on the roadways. This is a look at the through street in the tree protection area as a result of the through street. So you can see the added area with preserving the slopes and building the cul-de-sac. So the request before the Planning Commission is a subdivision, a preliminary plat to create the 8 lots out of the 6 existing. And there are lot depth variances. I didn't point those out. Lot depth variances required for lot 7 right here, lot 6, and lot 4. The median lot depth in this neighborhood is 161 feet. So those 3 lots fall short on the median depth. So with this plat, there are 3 variances requested. So the primary issue for the Planning Commission this evening is, are the variances met? So with that, staff does believe that the variances are met. The practical difficulties in this case are the existing slopes that we pointed out and the mature trees. So the variances are requested as a result of the cul-de-sac rather than that through street. Again, they're trying to avoid the slope and the tree area and preserve those trees. Circumstances are unique here. This is a large area, unique to Morningside. There are no other 3-acre parcels in the area, so no precedent would be set in that regard. While the subdivision will have an impact on the neighborhood, the lot depth variances would not have a negative impact on the area. There's many lots in the area that don't have that, the depth that is proposed here. It's just that the median comes in a little bit larger. So in conclusion, staff is supportive of the variance to allow the shorter lot depths in an effort to save the trees and protect those slopes, subject to the findings and conditions that are outlined in your staff report. And I'll just point out, highlight a few conditions that are that would be required here. Again, that would be review by the watershed district in regard to the grading and drainage plan. The applicant would be required to enter into a developer's agreement for the construction of the roadway and the utilities, as well as the sidewalk. Park dedication fee, as I mentioned. Individual homes would have to comply with the overall grading plan. A construction management plan would be required for the overall development of the site. And in addition to that, each individual home, as it's constructed, would also be subject to the construction management plan. The establishment of those permanent conservation easements that I had pointed out. Outlot A would be deeded to the property to the east. And also, I didn't mention, they would rebuild the driveway for 4408 that would come in off the cul-de-sac rather than on Morningside Road. The traffic study called for a stop sign at the end of the cul-de-sac here. So any traffic leaving the cul-de-sac would have to stop before entering onto Morningside Road. That would also be a condition. The homes would be required as a result of the narrow width of the road. The homes would be required to be installed with a fire sprinkler system. And a no parking lane would be posted along the east side of the cul-de-sac. So with that, I can stand for any questions that the Commission may have.
Thank you, Carrie. Any questions for Mr. Teague? Commissioner Forrest.
I'm just wondering about the parking being on the no parking on the east side of the street. It's logical on the one hand, but on the other hand, if the other side is interrupted with driveways, you have people trying to back in and out of driveways with a sidewalk over there being interrupted. I mean, I'm wondering, is there any possibility or is there a strong rationale to keep it on the east side of the street?
Didn't have a lot of discussion with the fire department when we talked about that. They had just mentioned that their recommendation would be on the east side. So I'm not sure the rationale between one side or the other. Other than people generally like to park closer to their home as opposed to having a no parking right out in front where they would have to cross the street to get to their property.
That makes sense to me on the one hand, but on the other hand, you're probably cutting out about over half of the potential parking spaces then too. So that was my question. Thank you.
Other questions for Mr. Teague? Commissioner Carr.
Just one question. The diagram that's got the red on it that shows the tree easement, you had mentioned the one that we're looking at right now. Is the dotted line, is that the tree easement line or is it the solid line?
The dotted line is the suggested conservation easement. So it would be from the dotted line to the solid line here. There's about 50 trees within that area. Within this area, this line here represents the grading limits for the project. So these trees that are located within this area wouldn't be protected under the permanent conservation easement. It would be up to the individual property owners if they chose to keep those trees in that location.
Thank you.
And that conservation easement is one of the conditions that staff has recommended for approval?
Correct.
Carrie, can you, on this map, maybe point out, you indicated that there are 6 existing lots, and since they're only creating 2, that's the reason for only 2 park dedication fees? What are the 6 existing lots?
Let's see if we've got a graphic that shows that. Yeah, this one shows. So there's the existing home located right here on this lot, and there are 4 lots in between that were platted as lots. So in theory, they've paid park dedication for those 4 lots.
So those were platted long ago and far away, just
Right.
have never been built on, and so they are existing platted lots, and
Correct.
And the
Yeah.
park dedication fee is only collected when you create a new lot.
Correct.
Okay.
The idea when these were platted, there was right-of-way along the western lot line here, and that was to serve those lots.
Okay. Commissioner Schroeder.
Carrie, with the conservation easement, who is the easement granted to?
It would be an easement that's filed on the property, so it's essentially to the city. It's an agreement with the city that those trees, that the slopes not be encroached upon or graded on, and that the trees can't be cut down without approval of the city, essentially.
So who monitors that? Who, from the city staff perspective, is responsible for monitoring a conservation easement?
Yeah, we don't have, we have a number of these throughout town, and from time to time, residents come forward where they want to do some grading or take out a tree. In order to do that, we have to take that before the city council and get their permission if they want to take down a tree or do some grading.
So the only way we know that it's being preserved for its intended purposes is if a resident comes forward and asks for permission to do something within the easement?
Yes.
Thank you.
Commissioner Carr.
One other question, again, the same map that we were referring to, diagram we were referring to before with the easement for the trees. Now, you said the solid line, I'll wait till you get to that diagram. But the solid line you said was where the grade starts changing. Do you know what the grade is there between the solid line to the dotted line? The reason I'm asking that is because if vegetation is cut, there may be erosion and excess water drainage, and I'm just wondering if that's been considered.
Yeah, that might be a question you want to ask the engineer who laid out the grading plan in terms of what those elevations are and grades as it comes through.
Carrie, on the list of conditions on page 8 of your report, item J provides the applicant must rebuild the driveway at 4408 Morningside Road to access off the new street and eliminate the curb cut on Morningside Road. Configuration shall be subject to approval of the Director of Engineering. Is there agreement by the owner of 4408 to that arrangement?
There is.
Okay, and I assume, is that something that we need to have? I mean, their garage enters from that side, so it'll facilitate entry to their garage? Right now,
Correct.
the driveway just goes off of Morningside Road and then takes a turn into the garage?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the last question I had was on item M on page 9 that requires fire sprinkler protection for each of the structures. Can you give us a little background on why that's included as a condition?
It's because of the narrowing of the road.
So is that a standard, or is that a recommendation from the fire department, or how did we end up with that?
Yeah, that's a recommendation from the fire department.
And are they basing that on some fire code standard or other code or law that we have to comply with?
Based on their experience coming in on roads that are narrow, they like to have that added insurance that the homes are protected with a sprinkler system. I think there's just the concern of getting a fire truck down a cul-de-sac that's narrower.
Okay, perhaps we can have more discussion with the applicant about that as well.
Sure.
Any further questions for Mr. Teague? Commissioner Schroeder?
I guess I have two more. In the recommendation, number 3, the findings, the proposed subdivision with the 3-lot depth variance would preserve the steep slopes in the site and permanently preserve 82 mature trees. I understand that we can have a zone that's permanent, but we can't have trees that are permanently preserved because they'll die eventually. So
Right.
is that, can we make that change as we go forward?
We can, and that number is actually, there's 50 within the permanent easement. So basically, with the establishment of the easement, there would be 50 trees within the easement.
And they would be preserved from the point of the original construction, but not permanently preserved. Then, as we go down further, the proposal on number 6 meets the required standards for variance because the unique hardship to the property caused by the existing steep slopes and the mature trees in the property. It seems that the variances that we're looking for are a factor of horizontal geometry and not steep slopes or trees. So can you explain how you came to that one?
Sure. If the variances wouldn't be needed if the road were extended to connect with Littell. So by doing the cul-de-sac, those lots in particular, 7, 4, 6, and 7, become narrower. And if that road were extended, we lose those trees and the grading into those steep slopes. So it's because of the steep slopes and the trees, we're trying to save those. That's the physical, or that's the practical difficulty here that's causing the change to the cul-de-sac and the need for the variances.
All right, thank you.
Further questions for Mr. Teague? Okay, seeing none. What I'd like to do from here is invite the applicant up to make a presentation, and then once the applicant's made some presentation and the commission's had a chance to ask some questions, then we're going to open the public hearing and take comment from members of the public who are interested in this item, and then once we've concluded that, come back up to the commission for deliberation. So, Mr. Seidel, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be back. Chairman, members of the commission, I'd like to present the Seidel family perspective on this. Much of it is a little bit redundant, I guess, from what you just heard from Mr. Teague, but I think it might put a little different spin on what's going on. And I thought I'd start with just a quick review of some of the information that we had during our sketch plan review meeting. This is information that was presented to you when we met last time, and also presented to the council when we met with them. And I'll start out by explaining who we are. First of all, my name is Frank Seidel. I live at 4232 Oakdale. I'm on the north side of this project in this house right here. With me today, I have my wife, Carol, and my sister, Tina Rohde, and my civil engineer, Pete Knabley, who has a company called Terra Engineering and has been very instrumental in helping us set this project up. So just a reminder that the Seidel family has been around the Morningside area for 50 years or so. We were here when the Morningside area was just Morningside before it was annexed to Edina. So we have a pretty good understanding of what the flavor of the community is and how it's grown throughout the years. So one of the questions I think comes up is, why are we doing this now? Well, a couple of events occurred, just to let me remind you of that. One, unfortunately, was my father passed away a couple of years ago, and that sort of set things in motion. He had asked me to take a look at what we could do with the property as things went forward and as they passed along. And it sort of created the initiative to do it then. The second is that my mother is now turning 90 years old shortly at the end of next month. And it just gives us an incentive to try to get control of this project before we had to do something dramatic like a fire sale, wound up selling it off to some developer who didn't have the longevity and the interest that we have in the neighborhood. So for my father, the family is really interested in creating a legacy for him. One of the questions that continues to come up to me is, why are we calling it Acres du Bois? Well, first of all, that's just a code name. We have no intention of naming this community Acres du Bois. The street maybe it'll be named Du Bois Avenue. I don't know, but it's just a code name. My dad called this Acres du Bois. His middle name is Dubois, and if I don't speak French, but roughly translated, I think Dubois means of the forest. So it's not a bad name, really. It's kind of fitting for what this property represents. He was really interested in larger lots, room for kids to play, lots of trees and grass, and really privacy and serenity. And we want to try to keep that legacy going as we go forward. Mom, on the other hand, is super interested in taking care of her children, and she wants to make sure that the value of this property gets maximized as we go forward. So we're trying to do that as well. Overall, the family's goal is just to maintain the uniqueness of the property as it exists today. Unfortunately, it probably can't exist in its current form as we go forward, so we have to do something. We made the decision that we wanted to be the ones to do the something rather than just turn it over to whoever. I'm not going to go over this entirely. I just want to remind everybody that we did do we did have a long conversation about what the character of Morningside was. Came up with some data, disproving a few of the beliefs that it's a community made up of small bungalow houses that were built at the turn of the century with backyard garages. There's a lot of those there, yeah, but they're not all there. So basically, what we sort of came up with was the feeling that it's if you can define it anyway, it's that it's eclectic. There's no two houses that are the same, and it's really about community, not about lot size or house style. Just a reminder, Mr. Teague went over this, the conforming concept. This is where we started. This is how we came up with the 8 lots. What we did was we wanted to find out what we could build without having to do anything with variances, what would be the structure of that. We came up with a through road connecting Littell with Morningside Road. The way I've got this oriented here now, Morningside Road is on the top and Littell is on the bottom. I like to do this because I'm looking from my house up the hill. The family really doesn't like this. We think it's very disruptive to the neighborhood. We've got a lot of agreement with the folks that live down in the Lower Oakdale area, the little micro neighborhood we have down there. Also agree that it'd be extremely disruptive. And it really doesn't fit what we want as far as carrying on that legacy and keeping the uniqueness of the property going. So we came up with the cul-de-sac version. And the cul-de-sac we are proposing, this is, like Mr. Teague said, what we showed you basically as the modified original plan at the sketch plan review. We got a lot of input from you during that meeting, and it seemed like everybody was getting more and more comfortable with this plan. The family is very comfortable with this plan. The features, just to review those, this is an 8-lot subdivision, 6 new houses. One of the houses where my mom lives here will be torn down. That's one. The other one down here in the north side is where Carol and I live. That will be maintained. So basically there'll be 7 brand new houses minus the one we're tearing down, so 6 new houses. There'll be 6 houses on the top of the hill being serviced by a cul-de-sac off of Morningside Road, and 1 lot and house down off Littell, just out in front of where Carol and I live. One of the significant things that we've done on this plan is we've narrowed the street from down to a 40-foot right-of-way with a 24-foot pavement. We'll talk a little bit more about the street in a second. It's got an 18-foot outlot here running next to the 4408 Morningside Road property, the Hardy's house. And what we've done is that when we reduced the right-of-way to 40 feet is we moved the whole right-of-way and road. We held this western border and moved everything away from the Hardy's house, so we were able to get as far away from their house as possible. We have a tree conservation area that we spent some time talking about, so I won't go over that again. We believe that the cul-de-sac version gives us the best use of the natural topography. As Mr. Teague said, this area right in here is a very steep hill, over 18% in angle, and it would have been complicated to build a structure if we did the through road, because these lots down here would have had to been heavily filled and heavily walled in order to make them buildable. So we think this just fits in the natural topography better. We've come up with a water runoff management plan that includes putting a water management feature in Carol and my backyard that we're looking forward to and trying to figure out what we might do with that in the future. And we've addressed the issue of sidewalks, making a sidewalk along the cul-de-sac side that invites people from the surrounding area in. So what we think our advantages about this preliminary site plan is that, first of all, we don't have any lots that are less than 75 feet. And we think that's an advantage because of all of the neighborhood uproar that's going on over houses that are being built on 50-foot lots. We think it's our responsibility that if we cannot have 50-foot lots in this subdivision, we should do that. And that's the decision that the family came to on that. We're happy that there's with the Hardy House, which is probably the most affected by this whole thing, that we're able to get some distance between their house and the next structures. The nearest structure, if it's put on the pad the way that it meeting all of the minimum requirements, would be more than 88 feet away in these lots 1, 2, and 3 here from their house over here on the east side. We like the idea of the lower house density than a couple of sketch plans we were presenting had 10 houses with 8 up on top of the hill instead of 6. We think that fits our feel of peace and serenity a little better than the other houses do. As we talked about, we only require three minor variances, and we went over which lots those were on. We think this is the best use of the topography. It's the greatest tree savings. It obviously has less traffic than the through street option, and we think it does the best of maintaining the serenity and uniqueness of the original property. So I just wanted to remind everybody about some of the issues that we have addressed in coming up with this plan. We've already talked about the lot width, nothing less than 75 feet. A little bit on walkability. It's an important thing for us as well. This is a neighborhood. We believe in walkability. We put a sidewalk in on the west side of the cul-de-sac all the way through to lot number 6 here to invite neighbors to freely walk through the neighborhood for safety for the children that might live there and the neighbors that live there. We looked at connecting the cul-de-sac bulb with this empty city lot down here and deemed that that's not feasible. It's a very steep slope. The sidewalk that we would have to build there would be unsafe or need many steps and a handrail. So we deemed that wasn't going to work. And this came up actually at the council meeting where one of the council members asked us to orient these 2 houses in lots 1 and 2 facing Morningside Road, mostly because there was a belief that with the 2 driveways that would now be on Morningside Road and the cul-de-sac, that it would have a calming effect on the traffic that goes up the hill, up and down the hill right in here. This is a very steep hill right here. Well, we as the Seidel family, we want to discount that because there always has been 2 driveways there, and it's not had a calming effect on the traffic on Morningside Road. We strongly recommend that the city of Edina and the city of St. Louis Park get together and put a sidewalk in on one side of that road or another. This is St. Louis Park here, this is Edina here, but Edina ends 1 lot over. So in order to do that, there'd have to be a community effort between the 2 communities. But we know that hillside is very dangerous. We did a traffic study. We talked a little bit about that. It confirmed that the east side cul-de-sac was the safest. It it also confirmed that the load for the 6 houses is not going to be that much of an issue. The water management plan, we're working with the Minnehaha Creek watershed, I think it's called, the Minnehaha Creek watershed, to try to come up with the best plan for that. But basically, there'll be some kind of a water retention area. We don't really, Carol and I really don't want to have a pond back there. We just think the liabilities of a pond are kind of intense. But some kind of a feature that captures the water and makes sure that it doesn't become an issue for our house and some of the, and this other low area down here. So we're going to be very, very involved in that. Just wanted to make a couple comments on 4408 Morningside Road. This house here, Rick and Sarah Hardy's house, we feel that we've really gone out of our way to try to make this less of a problem for them. We know it's a big change for their house. Some of the things the families agreed to, as we've talked about, their driveway currently loads on Morningside Road. It would be very, very close to this intersection of the new cul-de-sac. Their garage, fortunately, the way they built their house, their garage faces to the west, so it's a pretty easy change to make their driveway load off of the new cul-de-sac road. I think that has a couple benefits. One is the safety. The other one is it invites them basically to be members of this micro neighborhood now. And I think that they're going to, I hope that they'll enjoy that. The other thing we've done is we're deeding the south 150 feet of this 18-foot wide outlot over to them, which increases their lot by 2,700 feet, about a 36% increase on the size of their lot. We've also agreed, well, we've agreed to, but we haven't decided what it is yet, some kind of a landscaping plan. We've talked about maybe putting in some spruce trees or something to deflect some of the noise and the view of the road. And the family has agreed to do that. Tree savings, we've kind of beat that one to death. The size and feel of the new road. The family would really like the road to be as small as possible. We think this neighborhood really, anything that would approach more of a lane feel to it would be the right thing to do. We've been working with the city and we've been working with fire and police to try to figure out what that means. We're a little bit disappointed that to put a 24-foot wide road in means we have to have the houses sprinkled. But we also believe that putting in a big road in a small area like this will just not look right. So we're gonna try to do that. We've also been told, and I don't know if this is true, that there's a ordinance that's being looked at either citywide or statewide to require sprinkler systems in all new housing in the next couple of years. So it might be a moot point anyway. We'll lay the structure out for the proper support for sprinkled houses, and I'll let you guys fight that out when the people come with their building permits. Okay, I think that's, the other thing on the road that we learned is that the city really doesn't want us to do any kind of permeable center on the cul-de-sac. We were hoping that we'd be able to put some kind of a structure in there that would allow some of the water to be dissipated on the top of the hill rather than forwarding it all down. We talked a little bit about some kind of a hidden water trap. Yeah, Pete will talk about that in just a second. That might do that. So there might be some other ways. Still a little bit of a work in process, I guess, is what I'm saying. But we would like to try to figure out how to manage some of that water while it's up on top of the hill rather than sending it all down below. The final thing is the character of Morningside issue. We as a family believe that this property is a very unique piece of property. It's always been unique. It's been nothing like the rest of Morningside. We feel that it's really not necessary for us to make it look like the rest of Morningside. It's never looked like the rest of Morningside. So we think we've got a great opportunity here to create a nice micro neighborhood, pocket neighborhood, call it what you will, that'll be a legacy for both my mother and father and be something that the neighborhood will really enjoy. I think that it'll be a nice subdivision when we get done with it. So that's all I have. Is it appropriate for questions now, or do I wait till the end?
Sure. Any questions from the
Okay.
commission for Mr. Seidel? Commissioner Potts.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the narrow right-of-way and that sprinkler requirement? And I guess, but before you answer that, let me say I like what you've done overall with this plan. I think there are a lot of good things about it. And my questions with the sprinkler requirement, you stated you were interested in a narrower street. We suggested that as well, without intending to put any additional burden on. So can you tell us a little more about the negotiations you were in?
Yeah, the original negotiation was a meeting that I had with the fire chief and the fire marshal. This was a couple months ago, I guess. I wanted to make them aware of what we were doing and ask their opinion on just this topic, the road and the cul-de-sac. And they, at that meeting, made the comment that they're just not comfortable with a street that's less than 27 feet wide, that they would prefer it to be that, and that if we wanted to go any narrower than that, that they would strongly recommend. And I don't know where it turned into a requirement, but that they would recommend that the houses be sprinkled. Now, I actually missed a meeting that Mr. Teague and Mr. Knabely had in my absence to discuss this, and they may have a little more information on that.
So you've currently got a 24-foot wide paved surface and a 40-foot right-of-way.
Correct.
If you went to 27 without changing the right-of-way, do you get the sense they may
I
lift that
believe that's
requirement?
true. Yes, we believe that that's true. Yeah, now, one of the things I'm not an expert at this, but I'm a little bit mystified by the fact that there's a cul-de-sac at the end of this that they can turn their fire trucks around in. So it's not like it's a dead-end street that we're dealing with. So I'm doing what I'm told as far as building the road. I've done some research on sprinkling houses. It adds some cost to the building of the house, but it's becoming a lot more user-friendly or builder-friendly than it used to be. So it may not be as much of an issue as, I didn't want to make that the stake that said we can't have a cute little road going into this place.
Sure. And the last thing for me on that topic, Carrie, do we have many homes in Edina that are sprinkled?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Are you aware of any?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Not single-family home.
Thanks.
Other questions? Commissioner Forrest.
One of our commissioners who couldn't be here tonight is in favor of having the N2 lots face Morningside, and I think there was some discussion about that at the council meeting as well, perhaps. Could you give us the rationale for choosing this configuration
Sure.
instead?
Yeah. The main one actually had to do with the fact that if we make we're talking about these two lots here, lots 1 and 2, and actually orienting them so that they load off of Morningside Road here and here, so they face this way. Basically, the lot line would come through here. And the one thing that we as a family really didn't care for was that this house here, which I think we would now be lot number 2, that runs parallel to the border. Sorry, my pointer keeps going away. Right in here, this house would be kind of ostracized from this little community, and actually all by itself, right on the St. Louis Park border, not really very many neighbors. We thought that this, orienting the houses off this cul-de-sac, includes all of these people in this cool little neighborhood, and really is a really nice way to set this up. That's basically what it was. One of the council members, like I said, was in favor of the houses facing to Morningside Road, mostly because she thought it would be a calming effect on the traffic, because the extra driveways would create that initiative for drivers to slow down. Like I told you, we know that's not true. There's already 2 driveways there, and the drivers don't slow down. So we discounted that on that on that information as well. So the family just feels much better about the way this is oriented.
Commissioner Carr.
Did you mention association? Is this a homeowners association of some type, or?
It is not.
It's
No.
not, okay.
All these lots will be independent and controlled by the city of Edina.
Okay, and that's a city street?
It's a city
With the
street, yes.
cul-de-sac?
Yes.
And is there any lighting plan for that area?
I believe there is. There's been some requirement to put some streetlights in, 3, I think, if I remember correctly. The streetlights, I think, need to be discussed. I'm believing that some of the neighbors don't want the light pollution,
Yeah.
so we have to decide how we're going to light that. But yeah, there has been some discussion on lighting, and you think that would probably be included in the next plan, right? In the final? Yeah. It is on this one? Okay.
And
The
then one other.
boss says it's on this one.
Okay, good. Okay, and then one other question, going back to the tree conservation area. I think that when the write-up was done by the staff, approval was contingent upon certain conditions. One of them was, I think it says permanent tree conservation easement. The permanent, I believe, refers to the nature of the easement being permanent, not necessarily the trees being permanent. It's a permanent easement recorded on the deeds and granted in favor of the city. But one other thing is, I'm not wondering why it was limited to just trees. If you take a look at the property, there's undergrowth, there's brush, and if someone were to keep the trees and cut all the undergrowth away, you would cause erosion problems and also change the scenic nature of that property. So I don't know if that's ever been discussed, but generally a conservation easement sometimes will protect more than just trees, but also undergrowth.
Granted, just for your information, since you probably haven't seen this property in the summertime, most of that undergrowth was buckthorn, and most of it's been removed already.
Other questions for Mr. Seidel? Commissioner Schroeder.
I have more questions about the conservation easement and trying to understand why it didn't coincide with the grading limits, which are outside of that. It seems you're trying to, like the requirement that of 2D, or the condition requires compliance of each individual home with the overall grading plan, subject to review and approval by the city engineer. So why didn't the conservation easement coincide with the grading limits? And what variance might we expect between the grading plan that we see here versus a grading plan for the individual lot that might subject trees in the area between the grading limits and the conservation easement to be impacted?
I might have to defer to my expert on this one.
Did Mr. Knably have part of the presentation as well? Okay.
I think he's just here to fill in the blanks. If
Okay. Otherwise, I thought this would be a good segue to your
Oh,
presentation.
nice. It is a good segue, but
Okay. Welcome, Mr. Knably.
Yeah, Planning Commission members, my name is Peter Knably with Terra Engineering again. I was here both for the earlier Planning Commission and the City Council meeting. In regards to the conservation easement, again, the intent is to provide a conservation easement that would be, again, permanent, but not overly restrictive to the builders and the families that are going to build on these homes. The grading plan that we're showing is a concept grading plan. We don't know the size of the homes, the styles, the models, what the families will design for those individual homes. The grading limit that we're showing on our grading plan is a estimated grading limit based on our estimate of what the home types would be. But that's not to say that grading limit, couldn't move both forward and backwards, which should be the intent of the grading plan. And it allows more flexibility for the home construction to build, either up to the grading limit that we have shown or shorter than that. But we typically don't try to maximize that conservation easement because it's too restrictive to the people that want to build on those individual lots.
So is there a plan for the trees that are in the zone between the conservation limit and the conservation easement and the grading limits, or are those just subject to whatever size home? I look at the grading pads that have been identified on the grading plan, and the footprint size of those is already 2,500 square feet, which would seem to be reasonable for a footprint of a home.
Sure.
And you're suggesting the homes might have footprints that are larger than 2,500 square feet?
No, I'm suggesting that that we would leave it up to the designers and families that are going to build to determine what size home they build and where it sits within the setbacks for that lot. We're suggesting where they could go, but we're not mandating that as part of our plan.
So if somebody were to put in a home where the pad would move, it would impact the overall grading plan by shifting the grading limits.
Sure.
And potentially moving the grading limits closer to trees that we're trying to preserve.
Correct.
So can you tell me how the conservation easement limits were defined? Because we are concerned not just about the trees themselves, but also the roots and what's actually supporting those trees, and trying to not preserve them permanently, but give them the opportunity to continue to grow and survive for the intentions of the easement. So how was the grading, how was the conservation easement line determined?
Well, it's basically determined where it would be at a point where it would save the trees that are within it, obviously, but not go up to the proposed grading limit line. Because we understand if they do grade up to that line, the trees that are on the edge could get damaged and could get removed as part of the construction. So we're trying to save that row of trees beyond there. Also, we're trying to, again, not be overly restrictive to the buyers of the property.
So according to what you're saying then about how the individual home lot, somebody could grade up to the edge of the conservation limit. There's no grading setback that you're imposing to help preserve. They could fill or they could cut up much closer to the grading limits based on an individual home being placed in these lots. So you're protecting the trees through the conservation easement.
Correct.
And where the grading limits are set back. But a future homeowner building a custom-designed home may actually impact the trees within the conservation easement by the actions they take grading these sites.
They could, but we don't expect homes to be built that far back in the lots. We think it'd be unreasonable to expect that they wouldn't build close to the street like most people would.
Well, that's what I would expect too,
Right.
and that's where I was going, saying why didn't the grading limits coincide with the conservation easement?
Again, because it would be we think it's too restrictive.
I also have one question I want to ask about the variances. I understand you're trying to minimize the number of variances.
Correct.
So why didn't you adjust the lot line that runs east-west between lots 5 and 6, 21 feet further north between lots 7 and 8, to eliminate one of the variances you're asking for?
I guess I don't follow where that is
If
going.
you look at the lot line that separates lots 5 and 6 from 7 and 8, you're asking for variances on lot 6 and lot 7. And I'll point out that at the beginning of the staff report, it indicates you're asking for, in the chart it says lot 8 is requested for a variance. I think that's supposed to be lot 7. But if that lot line, that east-west line dividing, just start for the easy part, lots 6 and 7 were to slide 21 feet further north, you wouldn't need a variance for lot 6.
Correct.
You would need a variance for lot 7. You're already asking for a variance for lot 7. And you would eliminate one variance.
No, I see that. Yeah, we're asking for a variance, and I think it's lots 4, 6, and 7. And the reason we did 6 and 7 instead of trying to shorten up either 7 or 6 and push that variance onto one or the other is we tried to split the difference and have more of a minor variance on 2 than a major variance on 1.
But if you look at the grading plan, and in particular the survey, in that area where that lot line falls, there's almost nothing that could be done on the lot to begin with. If you were to slide the lot 21 feet further to the north and eliminate the variance on lot 7, you reduce the size of lot 7, but not to the point where it requires a variance for the lot size. And my contention is there's nothing you can do with the back side, the north end of lot 6 or the south end of lot 7, just because of the slope that exists there and because of the trees that are there in the conservation easement that you're pushing for.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think it's true. It's not going to affect the grading at all. The homes will be placed in the same place. I just think it appears more uniform to have a lot line kind of midpoint between the two backs of the homes. Whether
Well-
it's used or not, or they have a fence up or not, I don't know.
I just wanted to make certain of what you're doing, because you said you were trying to minimize the number of variances, and I'm seeing that you could actually have done fewer variances. And Carrie, I have one question about Lot 8. How do we determine the lot depth for a lot like that? Is it in the north-south direction, or is it in the east-west direction that we're looking for the lot dimension?
I believe they showed it on their diagram. You connect you take whatever the midpoint is of the front lot line, and the midpoint basically at the rear of the lot, and draw the lines through. It's a formula that's in code. It's essentially how they've shown it on A26.
Okay, then I'm sorry, I have one more question. Do we have a requirement for lot frontage in our code?
We do. You need at least 30 feet of frontage on a public street at the street, and then the lot width is measured 50 feet back from that front lot line.
So can you, so when I look at the frontage of Lot 8, they have 44 feet of frontage on the right-of-way. Do they have 30 feet of frontage on the street?
It's on the right-of-way. You need 30 feet.
Okay, on the right-of-way. Okay,
Right.
thank you.
Commissioner Forrest.
I'm just wondering, kind of, it's more of a query than anything else, regarding what Commissioner Schroeder was saying about the tree conservation easement. Are we allowing greater leeway to potential builders and owners, not only because of house or building location, but also because of the possibility of them wanting to regrade the land maybe more severely in order to allow a walkout in the back? And if that's the case, then I'm a little concerned that we're, the tree conservation easement is kind of in word only.
Commissioner Carr.
Yeah, I have the same comment as well. Again, if you have the grading limit line, that means that the builders cannot go beyond that point, right, to change the grade?
No.
Then why would you not allow a conservation easement starting there?
Well, excuse me. Commissioner, the grading limit line isn't a line that the builders can exceed. It's an estimated line on our grading plan based on the house styles that we show where we anticipate that grading line to be. We're not saying the grading line is a limit where nobody can cross. What they're going to be restricted by is the conservation easement, the setbacks, both the side setbacks and rear setbacks, like any other home that's being built in Edina.
So back on the map that Carrie showed earlier, that had the red lines, it's the dotted red line that is the hard limit. That's the conservation easement.
Correct.
That from there to the property lines,
Correct.
you can't go into, but you could grade right up to that dotted line.
Well, theoretically, but our experience is that nobody would.
And your
Can't imagine that
experience, so
somebody
your
would.
experience is then reflected in the solid red line
Correct.
that you anticipate will be where people will grade to, but you're saying they can grade further than that all the way to the dotted line if they really wanted to.
Correct.
That's the proposal.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Commissioner Carr.
Again, if your experience is that no one will go beyond that limit, I don't see a problem with extending the conservation easement to that line.
Well,
And I would like to know, how is the grading limit determined? Generally, it's based on grade.
Correct. Yeah, the grading limit is determined, first it's set by the, obviously the topography of the site. We've had the contours surveyed, we've determined the road elevation, we've determined profiles that meet the city standards for what the street grades can be. And then we start setting some, with the setbacks, some typical house pads, Where it's appropriate, we try to determine that some houses are going to be walkouts or lookouts or flat lots. And once we set those, we determine based on the contours and the grades of those homes what that back lot line is going to be, or back grading limit, I'm sorry. And that can always be minimized or kind of, made smaller or larger depending on the home style and the grading and landscaping in the back. Whether somebody puts a pool in the back or they put retaining walls, they could certainly minimize the amount of grading that's necessary too, but we can't anticipate that because we're not the builders for the property. All these are going to be custom graded lots.
I guess I have a question back to you on this. And this is, I'm a little naive on the process and the way that it works here. Don't the individual homeowners have to come back to you with a plan that includes grading when they file for a permit for the house?
Not necessarily.
Oh,
So
okay.
if they can build within the setbacks and don't need any variances, then they'd have to apply for a building permit, but they wouldn't necessarily have to come in front of the planning commission or the council.
Okay, all right.
Mr. Campion.
Mr. Chairman, I did have a couple more comments based on some other, and maybe these had already been addressed. One was, again, this grading limit and the type of homes. Again, we're planning on, behind lots 1, 2, and 3, it's relatively flat. We'd design those for either lookout homes or flat lots. And the back of 4, 5, and 6 are all walkout lots. So again, on that back lot line where we're showing the grading limit, there was a question of, is it going to be prone to erosion? Is it going to adversely affect downstream the existing trees that we're trying to save? And our preliminary erosion control plan is kind of anticipating that with requirements for silt fence at any grading limits. And we're also required as part of any future final development grading plan to get permits both from all from the City of Edina requires a stormwater management and grading and erosion control plan. We're going to need a permit from the Watershed District and then also a permit from the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency for stormwater management. So all three of those all directly affect erosion control. So we're going to meet all those requirements. So we don't expect that to be an issue.
Any further questions from the commission? We'll have time, obviously, to deliberate on this, but I wanted to make sure questions. Commissioner Scherer.
This may end up being more a question for Mr. T. We're in receipt of a revised memo from Wayne Hool, revised 327, with regard to engineering's observations. And there's some specificity there that isn't included in the conditions. I wonder if anyone has looked at that or...
It's a revised condition. It's really something that Wayne would cover at the time of when the road is built. It's reflected
He
in the...
specifically talks about things in a developer's agreement that are not articulated in the conditions in the staff report.
The condition is that, subject to his review memo, and so this is the
So
revised...
the condition is that we have the developer's agreement subject
Yes,
to his review.
to his comments in his
So
review
that
memo.
would allow him an opportunity to
Right.
incorporate any of these other items.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Just to follow up on that, Carrie, this is a preliminary plat approval application. There would be a final plat approval. Is that the time at which we would see more details about the development agreement, or what? Can you kind of explain that a little bit for us as well as folks who are watching?
Yeah, this is the Planning Commission's one and only time that you would look at it.
Okay.
A final plat would go back to the City Council. The developer's agreement, even after final plat, would go back to the council for approval. But this is the only time that the Planning Commission would review this.
And there was a discussion earlier about street lighting. Is that something that would be part of the developer's agreement?
That would be as part of the road construction.
Mr. Seidel and Mr. Knable, anything to add?
I just have one more. I'm sorry, I have one more comment. Again, looking back on my notes, again, under streetlights, when we had a meeting with the Public Works Director, he had indicated their recommendation was for 3 streetlights on the project. So we show that note for that requirement as part of our plan. So we're assuming that's going to be one of the requirements. and they wanted one both at Morningside, back in the cul-de-sac, and then halfway back. The other comment, and it does show up on our plan, it's probably not as clear. Under the stormwater management plan, originally we had proposed infiltration pervious pavers as part of the cul-de-sac, but again, meeting with Public Works based on their maintenance and cost and kind of safety concerns, they did not support that idea of having a kind of a center island of pervious pavers. So what we did and what we talked to them about and what we're proposing is basically an underground infiltration trench that's going to be in the boulevard around the cul-de-sac. And we think that's going to work as well or better than the paver system itself. So the stormwater that comes off the cul-de-sac will be infiltrated through these trenches within the cul-de-sac, and then any overflow is going to go down to the rain garden down below. So it's going to be kind of a two-tiered system, and we think that's going to work as good or better than that pervious paving.
So the stormwater management system will have surface water going down the slopes on the north side of the property to the ponding or
Correct.
rain
Yeah, the
garden
rain garden
or
area.
whatever
Correct.
it is. And then there will also be catch basin trenching in the cul-de-sac?
Correct. Yep.
And then along the entire street?
No, it's going to be just in the cul-de-sac bubble area because that's where the water is flowing.
And so what's the drainage pattern for that portion of the street where lots 1, 2, and 3 are located?
It all drains down to the cul-de-sac.
Okay,
so
so
that
that
whole
goes-
street's going to drain into this system.
Commissioner Schroeder.
I have to go back to the conservation easement for a minute, and I know you said that when you're going through your presentation here, we've kind of beat that to death, and clearly we haven't. But I want to know, is there an actual plan that attaches to the conservation easement? Is there a narrative that describes it? Is it just everyone stays out and don't cut any trees down, or is there something that's actually descriptive about what is what one can or can't do within the conservation easement?
Commissioner, the 3 conservation easements that we've done in the past, and we've done, I don't know, a couple dozen of them in different cities, and typically the wording is set by the city. You know, most cities have their own standard form because it's a recorded document against the property. So the wording, no tree removal, I don't know if it mentions brush removal, but it's whatever typically the city has. We do work in Minnetonka and also Edina, and I'm sure they have a standard format. But again, it gets filed against the lots. The only document that gets attached to it is a survey of the property that shows legally where that limit is, or a legal description of that.
So does that become a part of the development agreement as well? Does a narrative description that reflects the city's intentions for that easement, is that recorded as part of the developer's agreement?
If it's worded that way in the legal document itself, it is.
Carrie, have we ever done a conservation easement?
The city has not done one during my time.
So we
However,
can do what we want to here tonight.
You can, and to add to that, because the trees and the protection of the slopes, that there's a direct nexus there to the variances being granted. The alternative is they do the through street and no variance is needed. If the planning commission wishes, you could extend that out to that grading limit, essentially the red line that's drawn on A27. Another, and I might suggest this as a condition, you could require individual signage on each lot that indicates the conservation easement in the field, just a little plaque that says, this is a conservation easement, tree protection, and slope protection, or whatever it may be. But that's something that that the city of Minnetonka often did with its conservation easements.
I'm sure we'll get to that when we have some discussion up here. I want to look at I would like you to look at sheet 3, which is the preliminary site plan. And you mentioned some things about the stormwater management system, the pipe galleries that are located in the cul-de-sac or around the edges of the cul-de-sac. Is that correct?
Correct.
So where you have those, you show in this plan trees in the boulevard areas. Will those trees not actually be able to be there if you have a pipe gallery below or near the sidewalk?
Actually, we're showing it, whoops, I'm sorry. We're showing it on sheet 4, our utility plan. So we're showing the underwater or drain tile, but basically it's going to be either behind the curb or closely behind the curb. So we don't know if it's going to we don't know yet if it's going to adversely affect any trees there. So
But-
if it does, then we probably would not plant trees if it's going to affect that system.
So in this plan here that shows what I imagine to be street trees planted in the boulevard area,
Correct. Yep.
they may actually be precluded from some areas by the presence of the pipe gallery, the stormwater pipe gallery.
Correct. And if that's true, then we just push them on the back side of the sidewalk or instead of the front.
And then in this plan, is this a reflection of somehow the combination of significant trees that would be preserved and new trees that would be added? Or is there a requirement that you'll be providing a landscape plan that's associated with the subdivision, and we just don't have it yet?
No, there's not a requirement for a landscape plan. This is just a rendering of what it would look like after development, assuming these trees get built. But this is not reflective of a landscape plan that we're planning to build.
So, Carrie, we don't require a landscape plan with a single family, with a subdivision,
That's correct.
but we do if it was a multifamily, everything except for single family?
Correct.
Okay.
Gentlemen, anything further?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So at this point, what I'd like to do is open the public hearing. I know there are some folks here who are interested in commenting. I'd ask you to just one at a time come up, and the side podiums are better unless you've got something that you want to show on the screen, in which case you'll need the handheld microphone. Generally, we try to limit comments to 3 minutes. It doesn't look like a huge crowd, so I'm entitled to give you some latitude. But be mindful of the fact that the same comment over and over doesn't impact us any more than the first time it's said. So happy to hear from folks, and would invite people who are interested in commenting to come up and share with us. After all that, nobody's going to come up? Okay. And just state your name and address and tell us what you have to say.
Greg Murphy, 4311 Morningside Road.
Welcome, Mr. Murphy.
And I thank the commission members for the opportunity here tonight. And I've been living in the Morningside area for 49 years. There's not a cul-de-sac within the area. And I don't think it should be. I think it should be a continuation down to Little Street. And that's all I want to add to the commentary here tonight.
Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Rick Hardy at 4408 Morningside Road, where the house that everybody's pointing out up there.
Welcome, Mr. Hardy.
I just want to say that we are in support of this plan, actually, at this point. We've worked pretty extensively with the Seidel family. I want to thank them for that, the commission, the staff. We feel like we've been heard through the process. So, I think the considerations that have been given, we can live with it, is basically where we are. And a couple other things I think that were brought up, I just want to say, I'd love for the cars to stay on the side they are. If we're going to keep the street narrow and want to keep the traffic down, I'm not looking to add more parking spots there, if at all possible. It'd be great to keep the road as narrow as possible. Sorry? And, we're looking forward to seeing the construction management plan and kind of how that goes, because as we move forward, that's going to be a big consideration. So, thank you.
Mr. Hardy, so long as you're here, one of my questions earlier was whether there had been agreement on the moving of the driveway and all the rest of that. You're in a good place on that?
We are.
Okay.
I mean, we'll have to figure out the details and all that, and as Frank mentioned on the landscaping and everything, but I think we're in a good place with where we basically...
But you're not opposed to moving your driveway around the corner onto the new street from Morningside?
No, I think if the street's going to be where it is, then it's better than keeping it where it is. It's going to be safer, and hopefully we'll connect better to the new neighbors too. So.
Okay, thank you.
Hymanson, 4403 Morningside Road. Question, if I can address to you, Mr. Seidel. Had the property ever been considered to be sold as it was without the subdivisions?
Yes, it has. It had. We originally, when we started this process, went to the real estate route, talked to real estate professionals, learned that the value of the property is actually the land, and that pretty much anybody we would sell it to would be a developer, even though they might not say they're a developer when they buy it from us. So we at that point made the decision as a family to go forward with the plan to try to develop it ourselves, to try to keep it under control. But to short answer to your question is yes, we did try to sell it.
Could you do me I'm just curious, may I ask you what is the house assessed at for tax purposes, do you know?
Yes, I do.
May I ask what it is?
It's $750,000 about.
$750,000.
Yeah.
The house, what would be about the market value?
Mr. Hymanson?
I'm not sure
You know,
this is the
I'm trying
appropriate
to-
place
Well,
to do this.
so here's what I'm going to, for protocol reasons, you have an opportunity to comment. If you have questions, address them to the commission. We can follow up on those items, but we're not going to have a cross-examination of the applicant.
No, it wasn't intended to be that way,
Okay.
though.
Well-
I'm just trying to understand the motivation. I mean, I understand the legacy notwithstanding, just trying in my own mind's eye to understand what the value was or is equivalent to relative to the subdivisions. Does that make sense?
That's a fair question.
I'm just wondering if it's about money or legacy or a combination of both, or what's the motivation notwithstanding.
Okay, any other comments? Thank you.
Mary Cart, 4208 Branson Street. I have 2 points. One is it's a lovely idea about the conservation place and the grading prop, but that is a weak point across the zoning requirements as they stand now. And we have plenty of examples in our neighborhood where it has really become an eyesore to what people were allowed to grade their properties to, and actually tear up trees on public land and all this kind of stuff. And the only way it was enforced was the neighbors constantly calling the city. So as much as I want to protect the trees, and I think this is overall a great plan, especially protect that huge slope, that's going to cause cause major water problems for the people at the bottom of the hill. So we don't want to do that to any of our neighbors. So I think it's very important. Where's the teeth to really enforce it when it's being built? But also, when future people buy that property, how do they know that they have to get a permit from the city to take down a tree? I also have firsthand knowledge of people in our neighborhood who have things in their backyards that they were not even aware of when they bought the property, and they were the second or third owner of a property that was a very much something that they needed to be acutely aware of, and they just did not know that this was going to cause some issues for them. Like underground storage tanks for water to not cause water problems for the neighbors. Second is an issue. I know the width of the street and the cul-de-sac, part of putting a cul-de-sac in was to make sure that fire trucks and ambulances could get there. It's lovely to have a lane. I live basically on a lane. Branson's one of the most narrow streets in Edina. I also have personal experience that 3 years ago called the EMTs to come to my house with a ambulance. It took them a half hour to get to our house. And part of it is because you have your narrow street, and you have people that might park, but also we know the snow does not get cleared curb to curb. So in these winter months, our streets get very, very narrow, and part of the sprinkling required, I'm sure, is because the fire department does not want to be held responsible if they can't get a fire truck or an ambulance down that street any time of year. So just keep that in mind. As much as we want it to be cute and pretty, it should be functional. Thanks.
Ms. Ernst, can I just follow up? I wanted to make sure I understand your first point. You were mentioning trees and drainage. So Am I getting it right that your concern is what's the enforcement mechanism to make sure that the grading plan and the conservation easement and the like actually get followed through on?
It should not be left up to the neighborhood to constantly have to be after people. It doesn't take just one phone call or anything like that. It's who's really out there truly enforcing grading of any property, anywhere, period, in Edina. That is a major
Great.
problem that needs to be addressed, period.
Yeah, and we'll
I
have
know it's not just with this property. I just
right.
mentioned it.
We're going to have a later agenda item where that's one of the topics we're going
Okay,
to talk
great,
about as
yes.
well. Thank you.
Sure.
Other comments?
Good evening. I'm Pete Killalay, 4236 Lynn. I would want to start by saying the Seidels are good folks and good neighbors. Appreciate the responsibility they're taking on this project. One comment I wanted to address came up earlier in terms of the orientation of lots 1 and 2. It was interesting to me that a couple of the concerns that were voiced were raised by the commissioner and city council member who actually live in the neighborhood, Commissioner Platter and City Councilwoman Bennett. I walk that street every day, and I can just envision somebody moving in there and putting up a 6-foot fence that goes 180 feet down Morningside Road, really changing the character of the street and of the neighborhood, and respect the commentary that the commission has had about micro neighborhoods, but would also ask that as much care and attention goes into the folks that live in the community today as the folks that would be moving to the community in the future. So wanted to raise that issue. And secondly, thank all the commissioners and Mr. Teague for the energy they've been putting into looking at what changes are appropriate to the zoning requirements. I would just ask that, given the magnitude of this project, that y'all make every effort that you can to implement those changes so that we're not faced with not just one isolated incident that is causing issues with light and space amongst the community, but 8 of them all at one time. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments? All right, seeing none, I would take a motion to close the public hearing. And a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. All right, so the public hearing is closed. We'll bring the discussion back up. I'd like to start by just going through a few of the items that were raised during the public hearings, make sure we're following up on those. Mr. Murphy expressed a desire for no cul-de-sac and the street going straight through. That is, in fact, what the code permits. And I think we've had some discussions on that throughout the now 3 times that you've been in front of us about the topography as well as the trees, et cetera. And we can have more discussion about that at a commission level as we consider the recommendation to make to the council. Mr. Hardy talked about cars on the west and the construction management plan. Carrie, I think that you've got a proposed condition being that a construction management plan be applied on this property. And I think that was mentioned later as well. One of the questions here is whether, if this is subdivided, it doesn't necessarily all get developed at once. They could be developed they could be one at a time, they could be all at the same time. Has the applicant got any comment or notions about what you would anticipate on that?
Yes, I believe that. Is this on? I believe that we've talked about that in the past. It's not the family's intention to string this out over years. To be honest with you, though, we really don't know what the next step is. We don't know whether we continue to be the developer or whether we find a developing partner. So we have a little bit less control if we decide to go with a partner or sell off to somebody after this next phase. Just as an aside, the phone's been ringing off the wall wondering what's going on with these lots, and I don't believe it's going to take very long for them all to go away. Does that help?
Sure.
Okay.
I know at one point you have mentioned, I don't know if it was in one of our hearings, the possibility that the construction management plan might utilize one of the lots as a kind of a storage lot while work was being done on the other lots. Am I dreaming that, or was
no? You're remembering correctly, and that also is contingent on us continuing to go forward as a developer. But we're trying to be sensitive to our neighbors and what they feel and the issues that they go through. And if there's a possibility for us to hold a lot, let's say lot number 4 or something like that,
sure,
and make that a staging area so that the product doesn't have to be staged on the street, we think that's a great idea. And you know, quite honestly, if the family stays involved, we don't have a lot of upfront money invested in this, so we're not looking for a quick return. So it would allow us to delay the sale of one of those lots if we needed to.
Okay. Then there was Ms. Carnt brought up trees and drainage, and the question that, a couple of questions as well as the narrow street. So Carrie, I think more of a question for you. To put it bluntly, who enforces both the conservation easement as well as the grading plan? If you have a grading plan on a subdivision and then folks wouldn't necessarily come in front of the planning commission or the council, they could just get a building permit. Can you describe for us what's that process? How do we make sure that we're following up on that?
Yeah, and that could be worked out as part of the developer's agreement, and who's going to be doing the grading for the street and kind of the mass grading of the site. We would want to have a plan in place that clearly is going to indicate where silt fence protection is going to go, where the tree protection fencing is going to go, work out all that detail up front as part of.
But when does that start? I mean, would that be when the first building permit is issued?
That would be with the road construction.
And would the road construction happen as soon as the subdivision is approved?
It could.
But could it wait as long as the first house being built?
The road would have to go in before a house is built.
But it could be just prior. I mean, it sounds like it's not going to be a long time, but if there was a period of time that lapsed after the subdivision approval and before the first building permit is pulled, it could just stay as it is until that time.
It could. And
so the grading enforcement the time to be checking on that is when the first building permit. And if let's say there's just one building permit pulled, then is the whole subdivision area graded at that time, or is it, maybe Mr. Knable, you have a thought on that?
Mr. Chairman, again, it's the intent, and I think it's shown and noted specifically in our grading plan. The only mass grading we're going to do is just for the street and the utilities themselves. All 7 new lots are going to be custom graded by the individual builders. So we're only going to grade out to the right-of-ways and then a little further, whatever we need to get the street built and put together. But when a builder comes in with a permit, he's going to do his own site grading, dig his basement, take his trees down, that kind of thing.
So the kind of grading issues that Ms. Carnt was expressing concern about would really be enforced at the individual building permit
Correct.
stage.
Yep, and they'll happen one at a time by lots when they get sold.
So Carrie, that raises the question about in our process, how do we, when somebody comes in, what's the mechanism, what's the system we have in place to ensure that grading is done in a way that's going to be consistent with the condition that we may put on the subdivision about grading and tree preservation easements?
Yeah, I think prior to any grading occurring, we would require that the necessary silt fence is put in place, any tree protection fencing, ensure that we may want to require that conservation easement area protected prior to the street being constructed as well.
And yes,
go ahead, Mr.
typically
Knable.
on any development, as part of when we custom grade lot, or when we have lots custom graded by the builders, the building officials, when they pull a permit, typically what happens, both through the surveyor when they do their house building survey, and then they pull their building permit, both parties typically rely on the approved grading plan, especially for elevations, because you don't want one house set up too high, one set up too low. You want them to match the elevations that we designed on our plan. Otherwise, it's going to adversely affect drainage issues. So that is typically, both the surveyor that draws it up and the builder and the building official typically would be responsible for that.
So is it the building official that's checking? Who's going to match the grading on a building permit application with the condition on the subdivision to make sure that our concerns about grading and drainage get addressed on each building permit?
That would be the city engineer will review the plans that are, the grading plans that are submitted for that individual house. The building official is the one, well, it's a combination of the building official, this new person that we're looking at to monitor all these construction sites. They would be the ones inspecting in the field.
Okay. I mean, it's a big deal. It's a concern, and it's one that we are wrestling with, especially in a situation like this. I mean, you've got an elaborate and I think well thought out plan for managing the drainage, but it doesn't do anybody any good if it doesn't get implemented. There was a comment about orientation on lots 1 and 2. I know there was a note from our fellow Commissioner Platter, who couldn't be here tonight, expressing interest in having those first 2 lots turned so both face Morningside. We had some discussion about this at previous meetings as well. The one thing that comes up from the comment I think is interesting to think about. I have heard a couple of times, and Mr. Clay, you made the point about the potential of a fence along the, 135 feet or 150 feet. I guess I'm wondering if they stay oriented the way they are. I get the fence kind of nightmare scenario, but are there ways that can work without being oriented toward Morningside? Because I think the flip side problem is you do have kind of the orphan property that is adjacent to the St. Louis Park border that kind of gets cut off from this neighborhood if you orient in both those ways. So I'd be interested in Commission thoughts on that, and Carrie or the applicant, if you have any thoughts about particular conditions on that property. Commissioner Carr.
Just looking at the diagram here, what if on plot number 1, you made the front of that house face Morningside, and there was a sidewalk, so you would only have one house instead of the other proposal was to take both properties 1 and 2 and move them so you'd have 2 properties facing. What if just on property 1 you still had the driveway come in off that road, but had the front of the home facing Morningside and even possibly a sidewalk that might be more consistent with the look of the neighborhood? Just a thought.
Which is the way the 4408, Mr. Hardy's property, is currently oriented. Isn't it oriented? So you're facing, Mr. Hardy, you're facing Morningside Road, but your garage comes in. Okay. Commissioner Potts.
I'm looking at the staff report, pages A1 and A2, and I think the way they have this set up is consistent with the pattern of lots along Morningside Road, in that on the south side of Morningside, you've got the narrow end of lots facing Morningside in the front of the homes. On the north side of Morningside, you have just as many sides of lots on Morningside as you do fronts. So I see what they've got planned out as being consistent with what's there now. I appreciate the concern over the side yard fence scenario, but can't see how we can impose that. I guess I understand the logic of having the single curb cut onto Morningside from this lane rather than multiple driveways and roadways as being a good way to go.
Okay, and then the last point, Mr. Hymanson made a comment about motivation. I frankly think that raises an opportunity for me to, at least from my perspective, commend you, Mr. Seidel, on the work you've done throughout this process. As I recall, when you came to us the first time, you came with a plan that tried to minimize the variances, and we invited you to do more variances. And I think that process has been a constructive one to try to do the right thing. And obviously, you could have just taken the property, sold it to a developer, and that developer could have come in under our rules and shoot a street straight through, grade everything down, remove the trees, and it could have been a very different outcome. So the fact that you're going to make some money, if you are, doesn't bother me in the least bit. I can't speak for my fellow commissioners, but I'm not alarmed by that as a motivation, and I think your motivations and your family's motivation throughout this have been commendable, and you are doing your best to try and make this situation the right outcome. So enough on the motivation. I think that gets through some of the questions and things that we've talked about. Comments from the commission about where we go from here.
Chair.
Commissioner Carpenter.
I want to mirror what you said with respect to the efforts that the Seidel family has gone to here. In the time I've been on the commission, I don't think I've seen a private party proponent who's been as committed to trying to do what he felt was the right thing to do, and I just think it's absolutely admirable. I know that there are others who may not share the same perspective, may not like exactly what's being proposed, and maybe heart shouldn't be a factor in it. But I just think your heart's in the right place, and I want to commend you for that as well. And where we go from here, and I'm actually comfortable making a proposal at this point, but I'm sure others may want to chat a little bit first.
Other comments before we entertain a motion? Commissioner Schroeder.
Well, I think we ought to talk a little more about the conservation easement, because I have a number of concerns about it, and they relate directly to how grading interfaces with the boundaries of the conservation easement, how we actually establish what the parameters for conservation of the trees are, what are the details of that. We haven't seen a plan. We see a line on a map, which is not a plan for conserving trees or addressing that interface between grading and the conservation easement. We have a storm sewer line being cut through the middle of through a portion of the conservation easement, which is surely going to take down trees that they've already indicated would be in the conservation easement. And we also have a swale that runs through lots 1, 2, 3, and 4, dumps out onto lot 5, kind of in the larger portion of the easement. So we are concentrating water now in an area where we would be trying to conserve trees, if I'm reading the grading plan correctly, as opposed to the current condition where water is allowed to disperse rather broadly across the turf and through the area where the conservation easement would exist. I think it's also to try and define a conservation easement as a straight line on a map when trees have been growing in this property in a rather informal or organic way seems a little contrary to the premise that trees are trying to be preserved in their natural state. We assume a line where trees can be conserved on one side, and on the other side we're allowed to grade up to that line, or one would be allowed to grade up to that line and ostensibly remove any trees up to that line. So we're only preserving or conserving trees in a line that's 20 feet along one edge of the property. And certainly there are trees within that would be preserved as long as the impacts out on the other side of that 20-foot line are, as long as there's no activity going on the other side of that line. And as soon as we start to do things on the other side of that line, I think we subject the trees that we're trying to conserve to potential damage. So I don't know that we've worked all the way through this. I think there ought to be a little more definition of what the conservation easement is trying to achieve, how it should be achieved, and as noted, how we're going to monitor the effectiveness of that to make sure that the community achieves what's being granted of them. I also think that the plan that's been provided shows trees within the public right-of-way, which will become, I'm assuming, the responsibility of the city. And I think that if we are having activities being proposed within the public right-of-way, we should have a drawing that defines what those specific improvements are going to be. The trees are not identified other than kind of sketch form. I think a landscape plan should be provided for anything that's going to happen within the public right-of-way.
Commissioner Carr.
I agree with all your comments. And I do think that there's got to be more detail behind the conservation easement and what the grade is in that area, what the potential is for erosion. I think the conservation easement is too narrow, given what I understand to be are the nature and the slopes involved.
So if we take a look at sheet number 6 on the larger sheets, the preliminary tree preservation plan, that's the one that has a, kind of the jagged line is the grading limit silt fence, and then the straight line, which is 20 feet from the property line until it gets onto parcel 5, is the tree conservation. And it looks like it's got a tree inventory as well. Is there some kind of condition we could recommend to be added to the conditions that sharpens up and addresses the concerns that Commissioner Schroeder and Commissioner Carr have articulated? Commissioner Carr.
I used to live in the St. Croix Valley along the St. Croix River, and there they have very strict regulations. And generally, what my recollection is that anything more than, 12% slope? I can't remember the exact degree, is considered unbuildable because there's erosion issues involved there. Carrie, is there someone in the city that is an expert in this area that could offer us some assistance on what is recommended for erosion?
The city engineer would be the one who would have the expertise there.
But I do think we need to have a better definition of what the grade is, what the erosion issues are, and what it is we're trying to preserve. And the line appears too narrow.
Commissioner Carpenter.
I don't have any opposition to that. It sounds like we don't have the skill set at the table here unless Commissioner Schroeder is going to jump in and draft something, which I suspect... We could
take a short break.
I suspect you could do. But barring that, I don't know that we have the individuals credentialed here who can make that judgment. But what I do wonder is if that's something that perhaps we can make whatever decisions we choose to make here, and assuming it were to go forward, that one of the conditions could be that the grading or the conservation plan would have to be subject to review and final approval by the engineer.
Mr. Seidel or Mr. Knavely, question that comes to mind for me as I look at this sheet 6 and look at the jagged line versus the straight line. The grading line, or the jagged grading line, can you remind me again how you came to that? That it looks like a very deliberate line that is following some kind of contours, and can you explain to us how you came to that line?
Yeah, I think you're right. It is deliberate, but again, it's based on series of assumptions when we do the grading plan. First we're making assumptions on what the final street grade will be, and then what the house pads will be, how deep they are, what elevations they are. And we set those as part of our preliminary grading plan just so we can make a guess or a good estimate of what that rear grading line will be and how it ties in with how the rear elevation of a proposed grade would tie into the existing contours at the rear of the house. So that's what we're attempting to do based on typical home elevations, walkout grades, basement depths, that kind of thing. We'll set some grades and then try to grade it out at a uniform, reasonable slope. But
does it also have to do with where the topography becomes steeper? I mean, is that...
Well, it does to a point, but it more so reflects where the existing topography is and where the proposed grades intercept the existing topography. That's where the grading limit line by definition is. But again, I think it needs to be clear that these are based on assumptions for home styles and home sizes that
well, so for instance,
that we don't know.
I mean, if you look at, if I look at parcel 1
Yep.
versus parcel 3, those are virtually identical parcels. They're both parallel, lined up to the proposed street, yet parcel 1 has a grading line that is much closer to the street than parcel 3. And so I'm just trying to understand why that is.
And the reason for that is on parcel 1, the grades are higher, and it kind of falls off as you head north. So to tie in the existing grades with the proposed grades for lot 2, that proposed contour has to reach back farther until it intercepts that existing contour. So it's... and that's just the way the grading plan is set up. It's just where the contours tie together is where the grading limit is, again, by definition, set. But again, if somebody puts a retaining wall in their backyard, they could shorten it up. If they put a patio, put a swimming pool in their backyard, it's going to expand it. So those are the kind of landscaping items that we don't have control over. We have control over what the garage elevation is in relation to the street. We have some control over what the basement and the first floor elevation of the homes are to make sure the houses drain and are consistent from lot to lot. But beyond that, this development or any development, unless you're in a tract kind of housing development, which this certainly isn't, we always leave that responsibility for the design of the homes and the design of the grading pad and all the landscaping and all the hardscaping to the builders and the families that are going to build.
Sure. So are you saying this kind of dictates how far back on the lot you can go with your basement elevation and your first floor elevation with the existing grade without having to do any grading? Is that the notion behind it?
Sort of, but not exactly. It says based on what the elevations that we're proposing on our plan, and you've got a rear slope that's draining away from the house, this is where the grading limit would be. Because it ties into the existing contours, and the existing contours are obviously uneven. So when we tie into that, that's why the line is jagged. So.
I'm slow on this. So.
Well, I understand how the grading limits are set.
Can you explain that to me?
Yeah, but I need to ask a different question
All right.
first.
Maybe I'm asking the wrong question. Go ahead.
You indicated that your grading, as a part of the developer, would be to establish the street grades.
Correct.
And not to mass grade the lots. Correct. You're suggesting the lots will be custom graded.
Mm-hmm. Again, when we do again, it's a preliminary grading plan for the preliminary plat, preliminary utilities. Until we do final construction plans, that'll set the street grades. They're going to be close to what they are here. They're going to be within a few tenths of a foot grade-wise. But then at that time, we're going to show a more exact interim grading limit that'll be on, basically just outside the right-of-way. And then the ultimate grading limit is what we show on our plan. And the ultimate is a estimate. It's not a hard and fast limit. The only hard and fast limit we're going to have is the interim one that we do our
And that was actually the question, because that
Sure.
interim grading limits isn't shown here, so we don't actually know how much disturbance will happen as a result of the construction of the street.
You're right, you don't.
All we can presume is that the grading limits that you've depicted here to establish the house pads, and importantly, on Lot 3, on the west edge of Lot 3, to create a swale that's leading back to the west edge of the lot.
Right, yeah.
So you're making presumptions about how, and you have to, in order to get a plan approved.
Well, and we're required to because we have to anticipate what the potential tree removal percentage is, even though that percentage could go up or down depending on where the homes get built or how they get built and what the size of the homes are. But we do it more of an exercise to make that determination, do the proposed grades fit the contours? And they do here, because we can get them to match up reasonably well. And what kind of impacts they're going to have on the overall tree counts. But again, when we do our first grading limit, the builders can be responsible for doing that outside grading, doing the grading limits. And again, they can be closer or further, depending again on what the family wants. If they want trees in their backyard 10 feet away from their house, they're going to have a shorter grading limit.
I think that's exactly our concern, that the distance to the conservation easement can be shorter or greater depending on some condition or some presumption about how someone's going to build a lot or develop a lot.
Right.
And I think, as Commissioner Carr was noting, some communities have established easement areas to protect bluffs or protect trees where there is a line drawn, but there's also a zone of no disturbance to actually help protect a
Sure.
bluff or
A buffer, yep.
there is, and we don't see any of that. So
Right.
our presumption, according to the plan that's provided, is that your presumption is that there's a logical line to which a builder, a home builder would grade.
Mm-hmm.
But we're saying, and what you've told us, is that they could grade all the way up to the conservation limit lines, that there is no buffer, there is no separation. They could go all the way up to that easement.
And if there and that's right. And again, I think it needs to be clear that the conservation easement that the Seidels are proposing is not a requirement of the city. It's not a requirement of the preliminary plat. It's a voluntary requirement is what they're proposing. And again, if they didn't have that, any home buyer could grade.
But
it's a part of the proposal that's being brought to us. And,
and in fairness, it is a fundamental part of what's persuasive about
Sure.
not building the street through. And
that's what
it has
we
been a
Absolutely.
foundational concept about protecting both the slopes and the trees, et cetera. And so I think that's why it's such a critical issue for us.
And I think it's clear, and I understand the commission's point of view. Why isn't if you're going to set a grading limit, why isn't the conservation easement right there? And again, the idea is that, I could show it. It doesn't matter to me, but from the owners and the if they're acting as the developer of the property and trying to not restrict builders and buyers on these homes, they don't want to overly restrict what can be done on them. And that's kind of my recommendation to them.
I don't think that defining a buffer against a conservation limit is an undue restriction on someone to buying a lot where the intention was to preserve trees or conserve trees in a permanent conservation easement. I don't see that as being an undue burden on someone buying a home.
No, I don't either. No,
and I think it's actually, it offers some assurance to establish that line more clearly and a buffer of some distance beyond that, that their neighbors, when they buy their lot, will be subject to the same conditions, the same restrictions, as you would call them, the same protections as we might suggest, or the same protections that anyone who's building a house would expect to have of their neighbor.
Yep.
Commissioner Carpenter.
Just for informational purposes, because I'm now on a learning quest, what's the value in having a line for the conservation easement and then a buffer as opposed to just simply having, drawing the line at the buffer?
Well, if the intention is to protect the trees within the conservation easement, trees have branches that will overhang. They will have roots that probably go, many people say that they coincide with the drip line, but mature trees, the roots will grow many times the diameter of the canopy of the tree. So by providing a buffer, kind of a no disturbance buffer, we're actually better assuring that the trees that we're trying to protect are actually protected by activities that happen beyond that. We're not, and I think the buffer zone, we haven't defined what a buffer zone is because it's not in our ordinance, and that's why I was pursuing this with Planner Teague. This is new for us. We should be defining what the expectations are for exactly the reason that Chair Staunton outlined for us. So the buffer is a measure of protecting what we're really trying to conserve in the conservation easement.
So let me get to you just in a second. So what I want to try and drive to, though, is I don't think we're going to be able to draw a line, or maybe we are.
I actually think we can.
Oh.
If we were to say that there is a definitive line at the conservation easement, I would say that there is a buffer or no disturbance zone that's some distance beyond that. And I would suggest that if we establish that line, it's a parameter that everyone buying a home here should take advantage of. We'll be able to understand, and we'll be able to be afforded some protection that every neighbor will be abiding by the same line. And I think it will be impossible for us tonight to define a line that would completely protect trees within the conservation easement because they're all in different locations. But we could establish, this is going to sound weird, an equally arbitrary line as a buffer outside of the conservation easement at, say, 20 or 25 feet, which would seem to be reasonable protection for the trees that we're trying to maintain in the conservation easement.
And so my point is I want to figure out how we fashion. It sounds like we're headed toward a condition, and we just need to figure out how to fashion this, mindful that this is the last time we see it, but communicating to the council that it may not be a preliminary plat approval, it may be a final plat approval, but there is some, we're communicating a concept that we're trying to have accomplished. I don't think we necessarily have to draw it out, because it might end up being in the wrong place because we don't have enough information. So, with that, Commissioner Forrest.
Now you've raised another question. Procedurally, I'm wondering, how are the variances tied in with the plat approval process? Does that process end here, or is that all tied in with the plat approval, so we really are just a recommendation?
You are a recommendation, but the conditions that you place on it are directly related to the conditions. So that they go hand in hand, but it's not a final action, it's a recommendation to the council.
So even the variance is not coming to us as a normal variance process where we handle the variance and then the...
Correct.
Okay,
Anytime a
it's all
variance
tied.
is tied to another application, like a subdivision, conditional use permit, it's a recommendation to the council.
That makes sense. Okay, well, that was just kind of an aside. I'm also concerned about the conservation easement, and one part of it that I would like to see go into is replacement of any trees that die within 2 years or whatever is reasonable as a result of construction. And something that's kind of puzzling me is that we talk about the grading and everything, but there are every lot here on your preliminary grading plan, which is sheet 5, except for the existing lot 8, and then lot 3, which is anticipated to be a lookout basement. Every single one of them is being identified as a walkout lot. And to me, when there's only about 4 to 7 to maybe 10 feet, except for lots 5 and 6, on those first 4 lots, difference in grade currently between the front of the house or the front of the lot and about where the back of the house would be, you're talking about digging out a lot of soil there, and that means you're significantly changing the grade. Granted, this allows your swale and everything, but I mean, there's the potential here if somebody wants a flat backyard to end up putting in retaining wall along the line of the conservation easement or something. I mean, we're talking about some possible really significant grade changes that could affect the trees, as Commissioner Schroeder was saying. So I just see that as another kind of clinker in the formula here, because I think that it speaks to the point of perhaps needing a buffer. And even though a conservation easement isn't necessarily, it's not required by the city in general, if it becomes a condition of the variance, it's required by the city. So I just want to clarify.
So what's the solution to address your concern?
I don't have a solution. I'm just very concerned when I see them all identified as walkout lots, or primarily, all but one on that street identified as walkout lots, and especially for the first 4, there's 4 to 7 feet difference between the front of the lot and the back of the house. So on some of them, so depending on the contours of the land. So
Right.
that means that to me implies a lot of digging if they want to build a walkout.
Okay, so I'm fair point.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to move this along tonight.
So all I'm saying is I agree with,
and I don't want
because
to
of that, I
preside
agree
over
with
my
Commissioner Schroeder.
third meeting that goes past 11 o'clock. And so we have to think in terms of fashioning some kind of condition that's communicating the concepts that we're concerned about. Because as I understand it, Carrie, the 60-day rule, we have to act on this tonight so we can get it to the city council.
All I'm saying is because of that, I share Commissioner Schroeder's concerns regarding the buffer zone and
So if we were
unawareness of
to
grading.
recommend something that, and I don't know exactly how to articulate it, and I'd welcome advice on that, but something that expanded, that added a buffer zone to that conservation easement, might that get to the place that addresses the concerns that you've articulated, or that Commissioner Schroeder has articulated? Commissioner Carr, since you also articulated them, perhaps you can answer that question.
Well, I'm concerned about what a buffer zone means, and I'm just wondering if we can't go back to the original concept. I don't know if it's acceptable, but where we actually move the conservation line up to where the grade limit line is. Because that is, again, where the builders are not going to be building in that area. They're not going to be grading beyond that point. And why not move the conservation line up to that?
Well, I'd be interested in, Commissioner Schroeder is reaching for the microphone, but my reaction initially is it sounds like that's a kind of a tentative line. We haven't figured this out yet.
They don't know where the grading will be on those lots, so that's why you can't establish it as coincident. That's what I was trying to get at the beginning. There's the grading beyond the establishment of the road within the right-of-way and the utilities necessary to carry stormwater down the hill to the pond. All the lines on this map are arbitrary and based on some presumption about what the house pad will be or the grading on that lot will be. I actually think that the way we could move this forward is to establish a buffer zone, and I would actually frame it as a no disturbance zone so that there's not grading activity that happens within that, which means no swale cut in there. Minimal disturbance to me could be focused mostly on grading. And then the only part where that might cause a problem for this developer might be Lot 4, but if they're custom graded, custom designed homes, then Lot 4 has a different set of parameters for how a structure would be designed and constructed on that lot.
So would you describe the buffer zone in terms of raw feet, or in terms of proportion, or in terms of relationship to the size of the conservation easement?
I would actually describe it as a consistent dimension outside of the prescribed.
In terms of feet?
In terms of whatever measurement you want.
Or inches, or I'm talking about
yes.
a precise measurement as opposed to a concept.
Yes. Well, I don't think there's a way we can get to a concept tonight. And the way that grading is being approached, I don't think we can deal with it as a concept either. I think the best we can do is to establish, just like we would setbacks, which are in a way arbitrary, we would establish a buffer zone or minimal or no disturbance zone at, say, 20 feet outside of the prescribed conservation easement.
I hear 20.
Just one question. Is the buffer zone only applicable during the building period, or is it a permanent type of, is that just a temporary type of zone?
I think it has to relate to the construction that's happening on the lot. So when there's a building permit, they would need to demonstrate that there's no activity, construction activity, there's no parked vehicles, there's nothing happening in that buffer zone. It doesn't mean that a homeowner can't establish grass in there or a garden. It's intended for the construction activities. If there's some expansion to the house, some other improvement, I think it would apply. There would still be that no disturbance zone in place. So the intent is to protect the trees in the conservation zone. So it has to carry forward anytime there's construction activities going on that could impact the trees that we're trying to protect.
That's good. Yeah, I think that's an important concept, because there could be building going on in the future that could again impact the conservation
And
zone.
vice versa, there could be landscaping that you'd like to do back there that isn't going to harm the trees, it's going to actually support the trees, right? or not.
Well, you probably don't need a permit for a lot of the landscaping that you might do unless for
But
certain hardscaping, so then.
Not hardscaping, I'm talking about.
Exactly.
I'm talking about my point is no disturbance. What I heard Commissioner Schroeder saying was you're concerned about construction activities. You're not saying you can't go back there and landscape around the trees and figure out how to, you can't, you can go back there and do things with the turf and the grass and the plant more trees and, okay.
And to be fair, the most major impact we'll have is when these homes are first constructed. And that's, I mean, we're kind of projecting into the future to think about what else might happen. And you're talking about things that homeowners will want to do in their lots. But the thing that I'm most concerned about are the activities that happen with the construction of the road and eventually the construction of the homes and the grading on the lots.
All right, so Commissioner Carr.
But we do need to determine what that distance is. And I don't know, Carrie, can you give us some input on that, or maybe the applicant could give us some recommendations on that? But again, how much distance do we have currently between the dotted line and the solid line to give some flexibility to the applicant and the builders?
It's all over the place. Some of them, there's actually some places where the grading line is on the other side of the conservation easement line on Lot 4. All right, so, but I feel like we understand this issue. So those who...
Wait, can I just jump in? Because we understand it from kind of a geometry perspective, but we haven't actually established any plans for how they preserve trees within that. If it's a conservation easement, if we're trying to protect the trees, if we're trying to look, we need to be, I think, more specific. I'm not sure that we can get that tonight, but that is something that I think should be delivered as a part of the final plat. Rather than thinking of a plan as we have here, a plan which is a drawing, I want a plan which is a set of strategies that achieves the intention of conserving the trees that we're intending to conserve within the easement.
So in the staff report on page 8, there is a list of conditions. And condition 2H is the establishment of a permanent tree preservation easement as demonstrated on the grading and tree preservation plan. I hear us moving toward an amendment of that condition. And I think your point is well taken, Commissioner Schroeder, that we can't get all the way there now, but if we can articulate what we would expect from a final preservation or conservation easement, what elements it would include and what geometry it would include, we could import that into the condition so that the council then could follow it through the final plat.
Might I just suggest something here?
Please.
First of all, we should be consistent in the terms, so establishment of a permanent tree conservation easement. My point, and Commissioner Carr's point, is that we can't actually preserve trees. We're not going to embalm them. We're trying to conserve this as a zone where trees can thrive, as demonstrated in the grading and tree preservation plan, and including a zone a distance of 20 feet beyond that as a buffer zone where we expect to have minimal construction activities, and especially related to grading and the original construction of the lot. I would also suggest that the conservation easement shall include, as a part of the final plat, a narrative describing the details of protecting the trees that are located in the conservation easement and recommendations for protecting trees and other resources within the buffer zone.
Getting all this, Carrie?
Mm-hmm.
All right, anything further on the conservation easement? I'm not precluding us coming back to it, but any other issues that people have? Commissioner Potts.
On a totally different topic, back to the condition 2M with fire sprinkler protection. To me, it doesn't make sense to burden the subdivision with that sort of requirement, particularly if they can widen the drive lane to satisfy the fire marshal. And I think as this goes forward, I assume that there will be further conversations with the fire marshal, and this will comply with code. So I don't know if anybody wants to discuss that.
Well, so I think that is a good topic to discuss. One of the questions for me is we have worked to try to manage the character of this pocket neighborhood, whatever you want to call it, in part through the width of the street. And then we're also hearing that at some point you tip over into the fire marshal and the fire chief recommending that they can't get down the street to fight a fire appropriately and they want sprinklers. So I'm not sure how to get out of that box.
The way that I understood Commissioner Potts' comment was we have a condition that all homes must be constructed with fire sprinkler protection in accordance with NFPA 13D. But I think what you were saying is the requirement is here because they're proposing a road that's 24 feet wide. If they were to come back and say that their road is going to be 27 feet wide, we wouldn't need this requirement, but the way it's conditioned, they couldn't do that. They would still have to sprinkle homes.
But are we okay with the 27?
Personally, I am. I think
So if you had to choose between the sprinklers and the 24, you'll take the 27 and no sprinklers. What's behind door number 2?
I think the most significant accomplishment was getting from a 50-foot right-of-way down to 40.
So the right-of-way is more
start.
important to you than the roadway width.
So I think, I appreciate the comment about concern for emergency vehicles. I just don't, I think the way this condition is written, it binds them to provide sprinkler protection to every house, even though they could avoid that without hurting the character of the street.
Commissioner Scheer.
Would there be, I don't know if this would be considered a condition if it's conditional, but would there be a way to rework M, 2M, such that we actually state the parameters? If the road is less than 27 feet, the requirement would be that the houses would bear sprinklers?
Are we confident, Carrie, that 27 feet is a magic number?
I'm not 100% certain. I recall 28 feet.
So maybe we do it based on the fire chief, fire marshal's recommendation?
Yes.
I mean, couldn't we reword it so that that is there, implicit? Should the street width fall below the recommendation of the fire chief, fire sprinklers would be required?
So on the other end of it, then, I don't think we want the road any wider than it has to be.
I know. I don't like losing that control. I agree with you. I found that intriguing in our earlier discussions and in terms of creating the type of neighborhood.
So is the condition that the road be as narrow as it can be without requiring sprinklers?
Not necessarily.
Why not make it just unless the fire marshal determines otherwise, that it would not be required. And therefore, you have the ability to be as flexible as you want, but if you were going to run afoul of what the fire marshal recommends, then you're stuck with sprinkling.
Commissioner Carr.
Yeah, I don't have an objection to that, but I think we want to make sure that that road does not move any further east, because we've got that land being deeded to the Hardys. So if the road became wider, it would have to go the other direction. So as long as we make that clear, I don't want to leave it open-ended. I'm assuming that our approval is subject to the that one east. Is it east? Yeah, east line remaining the same.
Is that the road or the right-of-way?
The right-of-way would stay the same, the road would just get wider.
Right, so the right-of-way, it's not going to change your outlot. Okay. I mean, it's a good question, but I think, so you can manage the road within that, what you've done is done a 40-foot right-of-way. We don't seem to have any issues with the 40-foot right-of-way. The question is whether the roadway is going to be 24 or 25 or 27 or 28.
Correct.
Whatever our fire professionals say it needs to be. Commissioner Scheer.
But I would like to point out that an additional 4 or 5 feet running the entire length of that road is going to be a significant visual change.
I agree. I think that's one of the attractive features is narrowing this as far as we can. Commissioner Schroeder.
Your original question was, are we okay with 24 instead of 27? And I think if we stopped at 24, some of us may not be okay with a street that's 24 feet wide, that's serving 6 homes, and at the same time, when we as a community have spent time pursuing ideas of a living streets policy, and it seems that there's a significant disconnect between what we're trying to achieve as a community, what codes are telling us, and we're in this bind of not being able to achieve from a community perspective what we think might be necessary beyond just fire codes issue. And I understand the reason that fire trucks have to get by, but it would seem if we have a 24-foot wide road and we have parking on one side, cars are 6 feet wide, it leaves us 18 feet for a fire truck to get by. Fire trucks are not 18 feet wide, and we only have 6 homes and the attendant traffic for 6 homes, and the likelihood that there would ever be a traffic jam on Dubois Lane is really remote. And I think that there just needs to be a little more sensibility brought to the whole idea of how we establish character relative to codes. We can't do that tonight. And the proposal before us shows a 24-foot wide road. I'm comfortable for tonight with a 24-foot wide road because there doesn't seem to be a way around it.
So then how do we manage the condition 2M?
I'm thinking...
So do we say to the extent required by the fire marshal? I mean, if required by the fire marshal? Or? Sure. But the point is, it doesn't have, I mean, if it's not a requirement, it doesn't have to happen. And we, I mean, I know for my perspective is, I'm very focused on the character issue. I really would like to see us keep that road helping create that visual image. But I get the fire issue. I don't want to create a dangerous situation either. So do we leave it as is with 2M just being subject to the recommendations of the fire marshal?
I like that suggestion a lot, and I guess I would just add to Commissioner Schroeder's point about the character of the road. It was really disappointing to hear that we have to have an asphalt roadway for this whole thing and the cul-de-sac without any way to infiltrate the water that's running down that street, again, because we're sort of locked into the way we currently operate.
The other thing I would suggest, Carrie, is, as this moves forward, it's probably a good idea to have the fire chief and or the fire marshal at the city council meeting so that, I suspect many of the city council members, if not all of them, will watch this meeting. They'll note that we had this discussion, and I think they need to flesh this out and push. I don't want to push beyond what's safe, but at the same time, I think Commissioner Schroeder eloquently puts the character issue and how we have to be trying to find ways to have our cake and eat it too. Other issues? Commissioner Forrest.
I'm just going to rehash or clarify my comments previous about parking. The reason I suggested parking on the east side of the street partly was because you are going to eliminate the number of parking places, if it's in front of the homes, the driveways are there. But also one of my big concerns was safety, because this is a street that then also has a sidewalk, and all of these garages are going to be back out onto the street type garages and egress. And if you have young families with children on trikes, whatever, it just runs into another issue altogether. Also, I don't, having the parking on one side of the street or the other side of the street isn't going to expand or limit the number of cars that want to park there, that if somebody has a graduation party or whatever, it's just going to spill out all over the neighborhood. So it's, to me, my biggest reason, though, I'm not wedded to this, but my biggest concern had to do with safety and just practicality-wise. As a homeowner, I would prefer to have the parking across the street so that I had better vision backing out of my driveway and there were more parking places available.
That is not, there's not, the current condition is no parking on the east side? And you're suggesting reversing that? Or is it just?
No, I think it just says parking on one side of the street, and I'm happy with that language going forward. And if the council or anybody else wants to address that further in the future, they can. But I just wanted my rationale there for the record.
Okay. Commissioner Scheer.
Time for a motion?
Oh, please. We can have discussion after the
No,
motion.
no, and the reason I said beforehand was just so that you don't have to go backwards again. On page 7 under staff recommendations, the approval is based on the following findings. Under A, it says there's a unique hardship to the property caused, and the new wording is practical difficulty, and if that could just be amended beforehand, that'd be great.
Well done. Commissioner Schroeder.
I do want to go back to one thing I mentioned about the fact that the plans that we have in front of us show trees within the public right-of-way, and we don't have any definition of that. And I think the easy way to achieve this is that we would like to have trees in the public right-of-way. We should have a plan that defines that, a landscape plan defining trees that would be implemented as part of this project.
So add that as an additional condition?
Correct.
Okay. Commissioner Scheer.
Shall I try?
Please.
So this could be a little tricky. I would move that we approve the proposal as set forth based on the staff findings and conditions with the following alterations. That we have Commissioner Forrest's observation about a findings language change. That we have condition H, and I'm not going to try to get the exact language, but I will state the intent that we establish a permanent tree conservation easement as demonstrated on the grading and tree preservation plan, conservation plan, which would include a 20-foot buffer zone beyond the originally identified easement. And we will look for some final platting description or narrative regarding how trees will be protected within those zones. And that condition M be amended to read something to the effect of any house that shall be constructed may require sprinkler protection in accordance with NFPA 13D, subject to the conditions of the fire department. Also that we add a condition P with regard to Commissioner Schroeder's recent observation about needing a plan regarding the trees that are in the right-of-way.
Is there a second? Second. Further discussion? Commissioner Schroeder.
In finding number 3 on page 7, I think we should just modify the language so that we're not saying we permanently preserve 82 trees, and I think the correct number, Carrie, you said is 50. And I think that the same modification should happen in 6C, which says permanently protects steep slopes and mature trees, and we should put in the correct number of trees, or at least define that those trees would be ones that are located within the conservation easement. I'd be more comfortable with that as opposed to a specific number.
Is that acceptable to the mover?
Yes.
And to the seconder? Yep. Further discussion? All right, hearing no further discussion, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right. You have our recommendation to the council. I don't know, Carrie, when is this scheduled to be in front of the council?
April 16th.
At their April 16th meeting. So for the applicant as well as any other members of the public who are interested, thank you all for your time and your patience. Next item on the agenda is reports and recommendations. We have two items. One is zoning ordinance update on residential development or redevelopment. And the second is the 2013 work plan. So let's take the zoning ordinance update. As commissioners will recall, at our last meeting, we talked about a process to follow up on the fine work that Commissioner Platter and Commissioner Forrest and Commissioner Potts did on the residential redevelopment research and public outreach. And we had a work session with the City Council on March 5th, and we are planning to move forward with discussing some recommendations about how to tackle any regulatory changes that might be necessary as part of that. There is a kind of parallel process going on with the City Council on a potential demolition ordinance as well as construction management plan regulations that, as I understand it, aren't really in front of us at this point anyway. But what I had proposed at our last meeting is that we first put a list together, that we have some brief discussion tonight about whether the list is complete, if it's a list we want to move forward with discussing, and that at our next meeting we have a work session, and I would envision it being at this desk, but a more informal, we don't have to take all the protocol to call on each other. I want to have a discussion about each of the items on the list to provide staff with direction so that staff can then go away, make some ordinance, do some ordinance drafting, bring that back to us at a subsequent meeting where we can look at the language, tweak it as necessary, and then notice and hold a public hearing so that we can get input from interested members of the public on that proposed language before making a recommendation to the City Council to move forward. So with that background, you have in front of you from your packet a March 28 memorandum from Mr. Teague that has 12 items listed on it as kind of the beginnings of our list, and what I'd like is to solicit input from the members as to whether we're missing anything, whether anything ought to be taken off that's on here, or whether anything that's on here should be framed in some different way. Commissioner Carr.
My general reaction to this is that it looked like a good list. I was not able to attend the March 5th work session, but I'm just wondering, there's quite a few issues on here, 12 issues, and I'm just wondering if some of these have higher priorities than others, and whether it wouldn't make sense for us to focus our efforts on some of them. I don't know if you got direction from the City Council on that or not, but as we start going towards 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, those seem to be maybe not quite as critical to what residents are interested in as far as issues. I don't know whether that's something we should consider.
Commissioner Scheer.
Well, I think some of them could be consolidated. That was one of my observations as I read the list. 1, 2, 9, and 10 are all really looking at side yard and backyard setbacks. They're just various elements of it. You know, what do we include? How do we measure it? Do we want to change it? That's pretty much one discussion as far as I'm concerned, and those would all be subsets of that discussion. I did not think I heard, and I of course listened for it because you all know I'm not in favor of it. Number 11, I thought in our meeting on March the 5th we didn't get much support for single-car garages when we talked to the council. But
So my instinct on this would be to be inclusive at the list stage, and that at our next meeting we may decide on some of these that we should just do nothing as one of the options. But that we at least have some discussion on whether to do that or not.
sure. So those would be my two observations. I think we can clump some together to narrow the list in response to Commissioner Carr.
The other observation I would make about that is that some of these also are pretty easy. So like the require access to the backyard from the front yard on the same property. I think that's one that can work in somewhere. It's been unfortunately, it's the poster child for what's wrong, and it's probably an outlier example that happens infrequently, but we can fix it pretty easily, I think. And it may be that as Commissioner Scheer says, these roll into, an ordinance that addresses a number of these at the same time. Right. Right. Exactly. Carrie?
I just would like to add one to the list.
That's
It's one
the
that
spirit.
we had talked about, and Councilmember Swenson had mentioned it as well, and that's the front yard setback. Don't know exactly what the answer is, but we have a lot of situations, mainly on the west side of town, on our larger lot areas, but averaging the two setbacks on either side has become extremely problematic for us. So if we could just
Especially
add-
around curves and on
Yes.
large properties. Okay. Everybody okay with adding that item, at least for discussion at the next meeting? Another item that I would say kind of we started with was whether we ought to, have permission for narrower lots and than 75 feet. Now, we did raise this item at the city council, and the distinct feedback I thought we got was they would be okay with that once they're satisfied that the regulations we have for how you construct a structure on a site afford the protections that we're looking for. So my thought is to leave it off the list for now because we're kind of focused on what happens on the lots we already have, and if we're successful in this endeavor, we can go back and deal with that issue again later so that perhaps we can stop getting variance requests for lot subdivisions. Commissioner Scheer.
One item that I'd like some feedback from staff on, and I guess it's part of number 3, just as we enumerate subsets. I have mixed feelings about how effective our ruling about raising the transom 1 foot over the previous home in a tear-down situation has been. And I know we had the best of intentions, but I don't necessarily feel like it's really accomplished what we wanted to accomplish. So I'd love to have some history or observations by staff about where we've applied it and how it's working.
So maybe
Certainly.
And maybe it's adding to, so number 3 for those who are still here is building height. Maybe it is just adding to that item a discussion not only of the top of the building height, but of the starting point for building height measurement.
The calculation.
Exactly. Right. Because the other thing that we do is the starting point, as I understand it, is the average elevation on the front of the building. And so we've had some walkouts with severe terrain that have really resulted in the back side of the building being way taller than 35 feet because that doesn't really count in the beginning measurement. So Carrie, maybe if you can add that for that item, just a kind of a comprehensive discussion of the starting point and the finishing point on building height. Any other items? I see there are still members of the public present who have been following this issue. I don't know if you've had a chance to see the list. If there's any items that you're particularly concerned about that you want to chime into, I welcome your input at this point.
You don't have a copy of the list, so.
Makes it kind of hard, doesn't it?
I was watching Kevin, and the TV went blank and went to the regular programming, so I got in the car and came over here.
Oh, bummer. We got the hook. I think that somebody's trying to tell me something.
I was just interested in the process. I saw it on the agenda.
Good. Okay. So any other comments on this item? Commissioner Forrest.
A big part of this process was soliciting input from the public and from various stakeholders in the whole process. And I just want to emphasize this, nothing is stopping regarding that. We still welcome suggestions, information, feedback on and wishes and desires and stuff. This is still an ongoing process. It's we're not at the last step of anything. So public comment is still welcomed, whether you email, whatever, contact
So,
City Hall. We'd
I
like
think,
it.
I think that's an excellent point. To Commissioner Forrest's point, what I would suggest is we get this list on whatever portion of the website we've had for the posting comments, so that people can see it, along with prominent notice that we'll be having a work session at our April 10th meeting, so that folks who might be interested can see the list, have a chance to think about that list, come to our April 10th meeting or observe it, and be able to follow what we're working on. All right, anything further on that? I don't think we need a motion or anything. I think that gives you what you need, Carrie, to move forward. Okay. Commissioner Carr.
When we discuss these issues next week, we're going to be just discussing them generally, not in the context of any specific ordinance wording.
Right. So rather than us trying to draft, which is a nightmare that none of us want to live through, it would be conceptual direction, is what I'm envisioning. That we would talk about an issue, say, here's what we'd like to see. Do we want to eliminate the requirement that you step back after 15 feet? Yes or no? And give direction then to staff that they can draft the language. And then I'm envisioning at the subsequent meeting, they would come back with language that then we can look through and say, is this really accomplishing what we're trying to achieve?
And for that meeting, can we have a copy of the current ordinance so that we could look at that? I think that'll be helpful in the context of our discussions.
So for which?
At our work session,
Sure.
where we talk about these issues, if we could have those snippets of it that relate to these issues, so we can look at the current ordinance.
Yeah, the way I typically lay out an ordinance amendment, I'll have existing language in there, and it'll be language that I'm suggesting as added language. It'll be highlighted, colored a different way, so you'll be able to see.
But I think what Commissioner Carr is getting to is in our discussion on April 10th, when we're talking about conceptual direction for staff to begin the drafting process, can we have the relevant provisions to this list of items?
Yes,
Is that
exactly.
So? I think that's a great idea, because then we understand at least what exists now and what that kind of language is. If you've
got it, I can do that.
I would suggest just a step further, maybe we can get that stuff sent out to us, because if you're going to sit down and have it plop in front of you right there, you don't have enough time to really reflect on it.
It'll be in your packet, right?
Yeah.
Might want to bring your zoning ordinances that night, too.
Yeah. There you go. We can all share yours. No, it would be nice to have the excerpts, so I think that Commissioner Carr makes a good point on that. Okay, very good. So that's the direction we'll go for the next meeting. The next item is the 2013 work plan. I wanted to revisit this, and I asked Carrie to put a copy of our work plan into the packet, just as an opportunity for us to check in on where we are on the things that we are that are on our work plan, whether we have the right things on the work plan, whether we have the right priorities for those things, whether there's anything missing from the work plan. And so I wanted to take the opportunity to talk about this and get input. To get the ball rolling, I would identify a couple of things that I think we need to add to the work plan. One is, I think, with respect to the second page where it talks about small area plans, areas from the comprehensive plan that suggest are potential areas of change, I would suggest we sharpen that up to talk about the Valley View Wooddale area, which is identified in the comprehensive plan. I think staff has had some inquiries from folks and some discussions with people who might be interested in doing something with that area, as well as one of the property owners, one of the large property owners in that area, who might be willing to explore that. And knowing from my own personal experience how long a small area plan can take, I would recommend that we kind of move that up a priority list. And I would, what I'd like to think about over the next couple of weeks is who on the commission might be willing to help lead that effort. I think we want to try and do something that is maybe more elaborate than what we did on the residential redevelopment, but less elaborate than what we did on Grandview. Right, bigger than a bread box, smaller than a Mack truck. So kind of think through that. If that's a process you'd be interested in, we can have discussions offline about that, but I'd like to add that to kind of sharpen up our work plan on that front. And then the other item that I thought is worth discussion is we recently went through well, we've done several planned unit development applications, and I think that for the most part it's been valuable. I think on our most recent planned unit development we all experienced a little frustration working through that and had a somewhat contentious result. And so I'd like to just find an opportunity for us to have a discussion about how that's working, if there's tweaks that we'd recommend to it, if there's ways, I know for instance, because of its nature as a basically a changing of the zoning code, we're really doing, we're negotiating, yet we're expected to negotiate in one meeting when we have something in front of us, and I think that's a little bit challenging. We do have a sketch plan process that's designed to try and ease us into that and encourage interaction with the developer before they've put things in ink. But I'd like to just have some discussions about that. One of the things that I found somewhat hamstringing in that process was our own bylaws, which prohibit ex parte communication with the applicant or other interested parties, and it makes having those kind of informal discussions or negotiations more difficult. It may be that because planned unit developments are actually legislative actions, not quasi-judicial, that technically they're not covered, but I'd like to have a chance to talk about that at some point. So those were the two things that I wanted to add to it. I also note that Bill Neuendorf circulated an email to those of us who had served on the Grandview Steering Committee indicating that the council is going to be having a work session at their April 16th work session meeting where they are going to discuss kind of steps going forward on Grandview. They have approved demolition of the old public works site, as I understand it, and that last time I drove by it was still standing, but I don't think it's going to be that much longer. And so I think, that is on our list already, but I think that may take a spot a little higher up the priority list as things move forward. And while the council may assemble some kind of advisory group on that, we may want to think about who from the Planning Commission might participate in that if they're looking for participants. Any other comments on that, Carrie?
Yeah, I'd like to invite everybody to that meeting. It's part of their work session. The first part is going to be, you recall about 5 years ago, we did the AUAR, the environmental review for the Gateway project. Every 5 years, we're supposed to update that. And with the new property owner, Hillcrest Development, that's taken over the majority of the land down there, they would like to begin that AUAR, an update of that. They've also got a development idea potentially for Bar Engineering to expand, if you recall where Bar is located down there on 77th, potentially expand to the east into the quad site, I think, as we had referred to it before. And so they will be bringing forth a sketch of what that might look like. I haven't seen that yet. But we'd like to have kind of almost like a sketch plan review with Planning Commission and Council to take a look at their plans and get some initial reactions. But it's really teeing up this AUAR that'll take place over the next several months, over the summer months, to update that. That would be April 16th, and the work session would start at 5 o'clock in the community room.
5 to 6:45?
Pardon me?
5 to 6:45, because they have
Correct,
a council
yeah.
meeting then at 7?
Right.
Okay. Further comments on the work plan? Commissioner Potts.
I believe there's some small area plan work going on in Linden Hills neighborhood with City of Minneapolis. I don't know if, I don't have much information on it, but I wonder if we want to offer to participate or join them where it abuts France Avenue.
Carrie, you have some information on what's happening there?
Yeah, I know they're in the beginning stages, and I don't know what the status is, but I know that is, they are beginning to kick that off.
So just you've got a healthy list here. That's another item, something.
And I think, obviously, to the extent they're doing planning on their side of the border, there's not much that we can do, but to the extent it affects us, it may be something that's at least worth paying attention to. I'm not quite sure how we go about that. Commissioner Schroeder.
Again, as Commissioner Potts said, we've got a lot in front of us, but I would suggest that as we look at kind of the policy that guides all of our action, being the comprehensive plan, we're kind of midterm between 2008 and 2018. And I think it would be useful for us to find time to review what we did in 2008. And actually that process started before 2008, and it will start again in 2018. And just try and get an assessment of what's working and start the process of beginning to identify very early on in our plan as a planning body where we think we need to be thinking about change as might be guided by our comprehensive plan. And we're doing a lot of things with zoning ordinances, but I think it would be useful to take one step up. I think it would be useful for us to look at, to try and push forward some of these ideas about how we resolve community character code requirements outside of our own code requirements, and other initiatives like Living Streets, and even starting to look outside of our community and see what else is going on. It's not too far away that we have Southwest LRT, and in 2018, Southwest LRT will be up and operating. So we should be not waiting until the very end to start thinking about how we really do planning in our community.
Well, and you and I served on that task force, and I think it was 2006, if not, I think it was 2006 when we started on that process. So, you know, that would mean 3 years from now that we'd be starting a process of redoing it. I think your point about the Southwest Light Rail is a great one. You know, that's going to come right by the city, and by the time the next comprehensive plan amendment is adopted, it'll be there, and there'll be questions that will affect us. Another item I know is not necessarily squarely in our bailiwick, but I know Commissioner Carr was kind enough to volunteer to work on it even before she was formally joined us, is that there's some work being done on the France Avenue permeability, for lack of a better term, horizontal permeability, not vertical permeability. And I understand there's going to be some kind of a task force put together on that. Carrie, have you been following that, and can you update us?
There is. Bear with me. I believe Director Houle just sent out an email today in regard to when that meeting is. Maybe Commissioner Schroeder knows what that is.
It's actually going to be April 22nd, and it will be focused on, as a part of the improvements that the city is moving forward in creating enhanced pedestrian movements along, and particularly across the France Avenue corridor. The City Council asked the ETC to look at kind of an urban design idea. And right now, the urban design ideas focus very narrowly on those crossings. And in conversations with the ETC and with Director Houle, we thought it would be useful to kind of step back and not an extensive process, in a very limited way, begin to frame urban design, guiding principles for urban design for the corridor. Not creating an urban design plan, but rather kind of beginning to frame, because we're dealing with evolution of that corridor in significant ways. If you look at Byerly's or the Milovitz Law Office and other things that could be happening on that corridor, it's important that we start to think about it in a different way and understand what it means to be talking about urban design for the France Avenue corridor, that it's not just about moving buildings up to the street. That was the subject of our last discussion. And so the goal is to, through the course of really one intensive workshop meeting, begin to frame what the parameters for urban design should be, and then come back with some recommendations for principles that could begin to guide us. And much like the Grandview process focused on definition of a limited number of principles that we could all agree upon, we think that's kind of a core direction for us to proceed with. And I think the mantra that we used in Grandview was there were lots of things that we won't agree on, but that should allow us to move forward on those things we do agree on. So that's where we'll start with this effort.
And is that group assembled? Is the committee assembled? Do we know who all is participating yet?
The ETC has its representatives, and Commissioner Carr volunteered from the Planning Commission. There will be a representative of the EEC. I thought there was one more, and I can't remember who the other entity would be. But it's a focus of the ETC, and as these principles are articulated, I'm quite certain they will be brought back to the Planning Commission for consideration.
So, Commissioner Carr, you're still willing to serve on that? Yes. Thank you for doing that. And then if you can just kind of keep us updated. I assume others could attend this meeting if they're interested, but if not, if you could, after that meeting, kind of update us on what's happening and where that's headed.
And that meeting will be down at the Public Works Department.
The new one.
The new one.
It's not so new anymore. I've been in the old one. You don't want to meet there. Any other, the Linden Hills item as well as the comp plan are both good items. I think the Linden Hills more trying to figure out how to monitor it. Maybe that's a planning staff. If you can kind of be keeping track of that. I know there's some folks in the Morningside Neighborhood Association who expressed some interest in doing that as well. Maybe there's an informal opportunity to tap some resources there of people who are willing to, be attending some meetings over there to give us some feedback about what's happening. But the comp plan, I think, is something that ought to formally be added to our work plan as an item. Any other items that people think need to be added or subtracted from the work plan? Can you, Carrie, just update this with these items that we've identified?
I can. Any changes to the work plan, we do need approval from the city council.
Right. So how will we go about doing this? Is make those changes and then forward them to the city council as proposed amendments to the work plan?
Right.
And is there further action that we would need to take to do that, or can you add those and then just move them up the chain?
Yeah. Yep. We can do that.
All right, and then let us know.
Just out of curiosity, would the council then also add things to the work plan?
Potentially, they could provide some additional direction how to go about. They could.
Because we don't have enough to do. If we just meet till midnight every time, then I think we'll get a lot more done. Yeah, we are working at it. All right. So interestingly enough.
Why don't we talk about our summer vacation?
That's the next agenda item.
Good.
Correspondence and petitions. You have council connection and attendance sheets in here. And I think, was it Commissioner Platter who was the co-leader last year with you, Commissioner Forrest? And here he's fallen off right away, early on, missed a meeting.
I would point out that I think, I'm sure it's the great calculus of our system, but I think Commissioner Carr should have had 100%.
I was training to.
Yeah, she attended her one meeting, and that was,
And she's already down at the...
I know, I wondered.
That's not fair. We'll have to recalculate. We'll have to recalculate.
You're welcome.
All right. Any chair and commission member comments other than what we have already discussed? Staff comments? That brings us to adjournment. Commissioner Carr?
I move that we adjourn the meeting.
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Thank you very much. Good work tonight.
Yeah, non-debatable.